That early morning, I was rushing to work and accidentally took my husband's phone. The moment I boarded the train, my sister-in-law called, and the very first thing she said left me completely stunned. My name is Riley, 27 years old, and I work as a forensic auditor in Chicago. Until last Tuesday, I thought I had a normal, slightly annoying marriage. I had no idea my husband and his family were actively trying to ruin my life. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to toxic in-laws who severely underestimated your intelligence. The doors of the Blue Line train slid shut behind me as I grabbed a seat in the crowded subway car. I reached into my gray wool coat pocket to check my morning schedule, but my fingers brushed against a sleek black case instead of my usual blue one. In my rush to leave our apartment, I had grabbed Spencer's phone from the kitchen island. I rolled my eyes, planning to text him from my work computer once I got to the office. Suddenly, the device vibrated in my palm. The caller ID flashed a name I rarely wanted to see. Vanessa, my 32-year-old sister-in-law. Assuming it was a family emergency, I swiped to answer and lifted the phone to my ear. I did not even get a chance to say hello. Vanessa's voice blasted through the speaker, shrill and frantic. "Spencer, did you finally get your stupid wife to sign the transfer papers? Mom says we need to list her house on the market by Friday before she realizes our family trust is completely empty. We are running out of time here." I stopped breathing. The rattle and hum of the subway car faded into the background. I did not gasp. I did not cry out. My professional training kicked in instantly. As a forensic auditor, my daily job involves tracking down hidden assets, exposing corporate embezzlement, and finding exactly where the money goes when people lie. I simply pulled the phone away from my ear, hit the red end call button, and stared at the dark screen. Transfer papers. Listing my house. Family trust empty. The malicious words echoed in my mind, forming a terrifying puzzle. I stared at the lock screen. Spencer was a 29-year-old sales director who thought he was a strategic mastermind, but he still used his birth year and his high school basketball jersey number as his passcode. I punched in the digits. The phone unlocked immediately. I opened his email application and navigated straight to the search bar. I typed in the word mortgage. A hidden folder labeled personal finance popped up at the top of the screen. What I found inside made my blood run absolutely cold. It was a lengthy chain of emails between Spencer Vanessa, her 34-year-old husband Jamal, and a real estate attorney I did not recognize. Jamal is an African-American real estate developer who constantly flaunts his supposedly massive wealth at family gatherings. He loves making snide comments about my modest lifestyle. He always tells me I need to stop pushing pencils and learn to hustle like true elites. He drives a pristine luxury SUV and acts like he owns the entire city of Chicago. They had spent the last 3 years treating me like a charity case. Vanessa never missed a chance to mock my off-the-rack clothing or my quiet demeanor. Jamal would laugh and offer to pay for my dinner, acting like my civil servant salary could barely cover a meal. They needed a scapegoat to feel superior, and they chose me. But looking at these frantic emails, I realized their luxurious life was nothing but smoke and mirrors. Yet here in these emails, Jamal sounded incredibly desperate. He was practically begging Spencer to push the paperwork through immediately. I opened the main PDF attachment in the email thread. It was a home equity line of credit application for $600,000 against my property. The house I bought entirely with my own money before I even met Spencer. My husband and his family were actively conspiring to forge my signature, leverage my home, and funnel the cash directly into Jamal's failing development company. Spencer had replied to the thread just last night saying, "Do not worry, Mom has it handled. She is setting up a dinner for us. I will get Riley to sign it mixed in with our joint tax returns. She never looks too closely at family stuff." He really thought I was just a naive, boring numbers girl who blindly trusted her husband. He had absolutely no idea about the $5 million trust fund my late grandmother left me. I kept that fund entirely separate and secret to protect myself from exactly this kind of toxic greed. I watched the city skyline blur past the train window, feeling a dangerous sense of clarity wash over me. They wanted to play a financial game with an auditor. They were about to learn a very painful lesson. Right on cue, my actual phone buzzed deep inside my purse. I pulled it out and looked at the screen. It was a text message from my mother-in-law, Beverly. "Good morning, sweet Riley. Come over for family dinner tonight. I have some routine tax documents for you to sign for Spencer. See you at 7. I sat back against the hard plastic seat of the train, breathing the stale city air. A cold, determined smile spread across my face as I planned my next move. I opened the keyboard and typed my reply without hesitation. "I will be there, Mom. I cannot wait to see everyone tonight." The drive to the affluent North Shore suburbs gave me time to compose myself. Beverly lived in a pristine brick colonial. When I walked through the heavy oak front door, the smell of roasted lamb hit me immediately. Beverly rushed forward with open arms, wearing a silk blouse, and a smile so wide it looked painful. "Riley, sweetheart, you made it," she cooed, pulling me into a tight hug. "We were just saying how much we missed you." I kept my expression pleasant, slipping off my gray wool coat. "Thank you for having me, Beverly. The house smells wonderful." Vanessa emerged from the dining room holding a glass of Chardonnay. She looked me up and down, her eyes pausing critically on my practical work clothes. "Oh, Riley. Still wearing that same drab suit from last year, I see. You really should let me take you shopping. There is a great discount rack at the mall if you are on a tight budget." I smiled politely and handed my coat to Spencer, who just walked into the foyer. He kissed my cheek, acting like the devoted husband, completely unaware that I had spent my lunch hour mapping out his fraudulent financial footprint. "You look great, honey," he lied smoothly. "Come on in." Jamal is pouring drinks. We gathered around the mahogany dining table. The crystal glasses gleamed under the chandelier, setting the stage for their performance. Jamal, my 34-year-old brother-in-law, sat across from me. He was an African-American man who leaned into the wealthy real estate developer persona. He wore custom-tailored Italian shirts and never missed an opportunity to remind everyone how successful he was. Reaching for the wine bottle, he deliberately shot his left cuff, exposing a glittering Rolex. The gold caught the light perfectly. "See this?" Riley Jamal asked, tapping the watch face. "This is what success looks like. If you quit pushing pencils as a boring auditor and learn to hustle like Vanessa and me, you would not have to take the crowded subway every morning. You could afford to drive a real luxury car instead of living like a college student." Vanessa laughed, a sharp sound that echoed off the high ceilings. "Jamal is right, Riley. You are always so stuck in your spreadsheets. Life is about taking big risks and making big moves. That is why we are the ones buying vacation homes while you are clipping grocery coupons. You really need to broaden your horizons." I sliced a piece of lamb, keeping my movements deliberate and calm. The irony was suffocating. They were mocking my financial caution while secretly plotting to steal my equity just to keep themselves afloat. "Is that so?" I replied evenly. "Well, someone has to make sure the numbers actually add up at the end of the day." Spencer chuckled nervously, exchanging a quick glance with his mother. "Do not tease her, guys. Riley likes her safe little corporate job. It keeps her busy while the rest of us handle the big leagues." Beverly smiled warmly from the head of the table. "Exactly. We all have our roles. And tonight is about celebrating family coming together to support each other's dreams and ambitions." The dinner progressed with more thinly veiled insults and grandiose stories about Jamal's upcoming commercial development in the South Loop. They talked endlessly about million-dollar budgets and luxury materials, completely unaware that I knew their bank accounts were bleeding dry. I just listened, offering small nods, playing the exact part they expected me to play. As the plates were cleared and dessert was served, the atmosphere shifted. The casual banter stopped. Beverly dabbed her lips with a linen napkin and reached into the drawer of the antique sideboard next to her chair. She pulled out a thick cream-colored manila folder and placed it on the table. She slid it across the polished wood until it rested directly in front of me. A silver pen was placed neatly on top of the document stack. By the way, Riley Beverly said, her voice dropping to a casual register. Since you are here, we have a tiny bit of paperwork to take care of. Spencer is partnering with Jamal on a brilliant new real estate venture. It is going to be incredibly lucrative for your future together. We just need to get the administrative details out of the way. I looked at the folder, then at Spencer. He leaned forward, giving me his best trustworthy husband smile. It is just a routine liability waiver, babe. Standard corporate stuff to make sure our personal assets are shielded while the development company gets off the ground. Jamal's lawyers drew it up. You just need to sign the last page. Vanessa took a sip of her wine, her eyes glittering with greed. Honestly, you should be thanking us. We are doing all the heavy lifting to make you rich. All you have to do is put your name on the dotted line and trust the process. I did not touch the silver pen. Instead, I carefully opened the folder and flattened the pages. Come on, Riley, Spencer urged, a slight edge of impatience creeping into his smooth voice. Do not read the whole thing. It is just boring legal jargon. We want to eat our dessert while it is warm. Just sign right there at the bottom where the sticky note points. Beverly nodded encouragingly, leaning closer. It really is nothing to worry about, sweetheart. Just a simple formality between family members. I ignored them completely. My eyes scanned the dense blocks of text, parsing the financial terminology with the practiced ease of someone who exposes fraud for a living. I bypassed the signature page and flipped backward to page 3, right to the core of the contract. The numbers jumped off the page, confirming everything I had seen in Spencer's email that morning. The room fell silent, thick with anticipation. They were waiting for the obedient auditor to do exactly what she was told. I closed the folder and pushed the silver pen away. I looked up, meeting Beverly's expectant gaze, then shifted my eyes to Jamal and finally to my husband. A liability waiver, I asked, my voice calm and perfectly steady in the quiet dining room. That is strange. I flipped the folder back open and tapped my index finger heavily against a specific paragraph. Because this looks exactly like a $600,000 home equity line of credit application against my house. The room went completely dead silent. The only sound left in the dining room was the hum of the central heating and the distant ticking of a grandfather clock in the hallway. No one breathed. Beverly froze with her wine glass halfway to her mouth. Jamal stared at me, his eyes wide and completely unblinking. For a fraction of a second, the perfect facade of the wealthy, untouchable family shattered, revealing the absolute panic underneath. Spencer was the first to recover. He possessed an uncanny ability to lie his way out of any situation. He let out a loud, forced laugh that echoed harshly off the walls. He reached across the table, attempting to place his hand over mine and pull the folder away. You are misreading it, Riley, Spencer said, his voice dripping with condescension. He used the exact tone one might use to explain a simple math problem to a slow child. I know you look at spreadsheets all day, but you do not understand high-level finance. This is a complex corporate structuring mechanism. The bank simply needs a guarantor placeholder for the mezzanine debt. We are not actually taking money out against your house. It is just a routine underwriting formality to satisfy the board of directors. I handle the complicated business elements of our marriage, so your pretty head does not have to stress over the details. He pulled the folder firmly toward his side of the table, offering a reassuring smile that did not reach his cold, calculating eyes. Just trust me, babe. I would never do anything to put our home at risk. You know I handle the big picture stuff, so you do not have to worry. We are building a legacy for our future children. I did not pull the folder back. I simply looked at him. The man I had married, the man who claimed to love me, was looking me dead in the eye and lying with the practiced ease of a seasoned con artist. He thought my silence was absolute compliance. He thought his corporate buzzwords had confused me enough to secure my signature without any further questions. He was banking on my supposed insecurities. Before I could respond, Vanessa slammed her flat palm down on the mahogany table. The crystal wine glasses rattled violently against the polished wood, spilling drops of expensive red wine onto the pristine white tablecloth. Her face was flushed with ugly anger, the mask of the sophisticated socialite completely gone. "You ungrateful orphan," Vanessa spat, her voice shrill and venomous. She pointed a perfectly manicured finger directly at my face, her acrylic nail almost touching my nose. "My brother rescued you from a pathetic, lonely life. He gave you a family. He brought you into our world when nobody else wanted you. And you are hesitating to support this family over some standard paperwork. You should be honored that Jamal is even letting you be part of this deal." Her words hung in the air, heavy and cruel. The orphan comment was her absolute favorite weapon. My parents had passed away when I was very young, and my grandmother had raised me until she passed a few years before I met Spencer. Vanessa always used my lack of immediate family to make me feel exceptionally small, to constantly remind me that I owed them my life for taking me in. She genuinely believed I was a penniless nobody who should be kissing the ground they walked on. I did not raise my voice. I did not flinch. I did not give them the emotional reaction they were so desperately trying to provoke. I turned my gaze away from Vanessa, entirely dismissing her outburst as if she were a toddler throwing a useless tantrum in a grocery store. I looked directly at Jamal. "High-level finance?" I asked softly, keeping my eyes locked on his. The wealthy real estate mogul suddenly looked very small in his custom Italian shirt. "Let us talk about high-level finance, Jamal. Does your South Loop development project actually need $600,000 to pay your contractors? Or do you need that exact amount to cover the margin call on your Chase Bank commercial loan that is exactly 90 days past due?" The color drained entirely from Jamal's face. He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. A thick bead of sweat formed at his hairline and rolled down his temple. I leaned forward slightly, resting my elbows on the table. "You see, I might just be a boring corporate drone, but I know how to read a balance sheet. Your contractors walked off the site 3 weeks ago because your checks bounced. Chase Bank issued a final notice of default last Thursday. You are entirely out of cash, your credit is maxed out, and the private investors you defrauded are threatening to contact the authorities. So you and Spencer decided the easiest way to save your own skins was to forge my signature and steal the equity from my home." Jamal started coughing, reaching blindly for his water glass with shaking hands. Beverly let out a sharp gasp, clutching her chest, as if she had been physically struck by my words. Beverly sat frozen at the head of the table, her carefully maintained posture crumbling. The matriarch who had orchestrated this entire ambush was suddenly speechless, watching her golden son and wealthy son-in-law get dismantled by the quiet woman she had always treated with absolute disdain. Spencer jumped up from his chair. The heavy wooden legs scraped violently against the floorboards. He reached out and grabbed my arm, his grip tight and bruising. His face was twisted in a mixture of absolute rage and raw terror. "What the hell are you talking about?" Spencer demanded, his voice shaking with uncontrolled panic. "Where did you get that information? You have been spying on my family. You are completely insane." I looked down at his hand gripping my arm. "Remove your hand from me right now," I stated, my voice dropping to a freezing, absolute pitch. Spencer hesitated, reading the unyielding warning in my eyes. Slowly, he released his grip and stepped back, his chest heaving as he tried to process how his perfect scam had just imploded in front of his mother and sister. I calmly opened my purse. I reached inside and pulled out the sleek black smartphone. I set it down squarely in the middle of the dining table, right on top of the fraudulent loan application. The screen lit up, displaying Spencer's lock screen. "You want to know where I got the information?" I asked, standing up and smoothing out my drab suit jacket. "Ask Vanessa. She called me on the 8 a.m. train this morning." The silence in Beverly's dining room was absolute, heavy and suffocating like a wool blanket. No one moved. No one spoke. For 10 long seconds, I simply let the weight of my words press down on them. I watched the arrogant smirk melt off Vanessa's face. I watched Jamal swallow hard, his Adam's apple bobbing above his custom collar. I watched my mother-in-law, the great manipulator, look from her son to her daughter, realizing her perfect ambush had just backfired spectacularly. I did not wait for them to find their voices. I picked up my phone, dropped it back into my purse, and stood up. I smoothed the front of my drab suit jacket. "Enjoy your dessert," I said quietly. It seems you all have a lot to discuss. I turned and walked out of the dining room. I did not look back. I grabbed my coat from the foyer, let myself out the heavy oak front door, and walked into the crisp Chicago night. My car was parked halfway down the block. I unlocked it, slid into the driver's seat, and locked the doors immediately. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the massive adrenaline dump of finally exposing their lies. I started the engine and pulled away from the curb, leaving the pristine suburban house behind. The drive back to our apartment in the city took 40 minutes. I used the time to steady my breathing and prepare for the inevitable. Spencer would not let this go. He was a master gaslighter capable of twisting any situation until you felt like you were the one who committed the crime. I knew he would try to spin this to make me the villain for discovering his fraud. I arrived at our building, took the elevator up to the 12th floor, and unlocked the door to our apartment. I had barely taken off my coat when the front door slammed open behind me. Spencer burst in. He was breathing heavily, his face red, his tie loosened. He had clearly driven like a maniac to catch up with me. He did not look apologetic. He looked furious. "Are you out of your mind?" Spencer shouted, throwing his keys onto the glass console table with a sharp clatter. "What the hell was that performance at my mother's house? You humiliated my family. You humiliated me." I hung my coat in the closet, keeping my movements slow and deliberate. "I humiliated you?" I asked, turning to face him. "You tried to secretly mortgage the house I bought before we were married to pay off your brother-in-law's bad debts. And you think I am the one who humiliated you." Spencer ran a hand through his hair, pacing the length of the living room. "You are completely twisting the situation, Riley. It was a bridge loan, a temporary measure. Jamal's project is going to close next quarter. He is going to make millions. We just needed a little liquidity to cover the short-term cash flow. It was an investment in our family's future." By forging my signature on a $600,000 line of credit, I countered, my voice flat. "That is not an investment, Spencer. That is federal bank fraud." He stopped pacing and pointed a finger at me. "Do not use your scary auditor words with me. You are missing the point. The point is that you went through my phone. You violated my privacy. You spied on my family. How am I supposed to trust a wife who sneaks around reading my private emails behind my back?" The audacity was breathtaking. He was actively trying to steal my house, but he was framing me as the untrustworthy partner because I intercepted the phone call organizing the theft. This was his classic pivot: attack the method of discovery to distract from the crime itself. "I did not spy on you," I said, crossing my arms. "You took my phone this morning and I took yours." Vanessa called. She left a voicemail basically detailing the entire scam. "I just followed the paper trail. It is what I do for a living, Spencer. Did you really think you could hide a massive financial fraud from a forensic auditor?" Spencer let out a harsh, bitter laugh. "Oh, spare me the righteous auditor routine. You are not some innocent victim here, Riley. Do not pretend you are the only one who knows how to do a little research." He stepped closer, his face dropping the mask of the wounded husband. The facade of the charming sales director vanished, revealing something cold and desperate underneath. "Jamal's business is underwater. We are facing total ruin. The bank is threatening to seize everything. We needed cash. Fast. And you know what is really funny? We know you have it." I felt a sudden sharp coldness in my chest. "What are you talking about?" "We hired a private investigator last month." Spencer sneered, his voice dripping with venom. "Jamal wanted to know exactly what kind of assets you were hiding. We know about the trust fund, Riley. We know about the $5 million your precious grandmother left you. $5 million sitting in a private wealth management account while your own husband's family is drowning in debt." He took another step forward, cornering me against the kitchen island. "You lied to me. For 5 years you let me pay half the rent, let me pay for dinner, let me think you were just some struggling corporate drone. You let Vanessa buy you coffee out of pity. You sat there hoarding millions while my family suffered. You are my wife. You are supposed to support us. You have to bail Jamal out. You owe us." I stared at the man I had married, the man who had promised to love and protect me. He was not sorry he tried to steal my house. He was not sorry he lied to me. He was angry that I had more money than he realized, and he was furious that he could not access it easily. He felt entirely entitled to my grandmother's legacy to cover his family's reckless greed. The revelation should have broken my heart. Instead, it crystallized my resolve. They had hired a private investigator to dig into my background. They had crossed every conceivable boundary. They viewed me not as a person, but as a bank account to be plundered. "You think I owe you?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "I owe you $5 million because you and your brother-in-law cannot manage your own finances." "Yes!" Spencer shouted, his face contorted with entitlement. "We are family. Family helps family. You write a check tomorrow morning to clear Jamal's debt, or I swear to God, Riley, I will take you to divorce court, and my lawyers will tear that trust fund apart. I will take half of everything you own." I looked at him, absorbing the threat. He thought he held the winning hand. He thought the threat of a messy divorce would force me to capitulate and hand over the money. He thought I was weak. I did not argue. I did not cry. I simply turned away from him. "We will see about that," I said quietly. I walked past him, went straight into the master bedroom, and locked the heavy wooden door behind me. I heard Spencer yell something from the living room, followed by the sound of glass shattering as he threw something against the wall. I ignored the tantrum. I walked over to my desk, sat down, and booted up my heavily encrypted work laptop. The screen glowed to life, illuminating the dark room. If they wanted to play a game of financial exposure, I was going to show them exactly how a professional operated. I bypassed the standard security protocols, accessed my firm's proprietary tracing software, and began running a deep, unrestricted forensic trace on every single account connected to Spencer, Jamal, Vanessa, and Beverly. I was going to find every hidden dime, every fraudulent transfer, every lie they had ever told. I was going to burn their entire financial world to the ground. I spent the entire night bathed in the harsh blue light of my laptop monitor. Keystroke by keystroke, I systematically dismantled the carefully constructed lies of Spencer and his family. The forensic trace yielded a goldmine of financial depravity. Jamal was not just a failing real estate developer. He was operating a massive, highly illegal Ponzi scheme. The trace revealed a dizzying web of shell companies, hidden offshore accounts, massive gambling debts in Macau, and a mountain of unpaid back taxes owed to the IRS. He had been taking massive cash deposits for commercial builds and funneling the money directly into his own failing personal investments. Spencer was not just a bystander in this mess. He was listed as a silent partner on 3 of the most heavily leveraged LLCs. They were drowning in a sea of illegal wire transfers, fraudulent commercial loan applications, and severe corporate malfeasance. By sunrise, I had compiled a digital dossier thick enough to send Jamal and Spencer to federal prison for the next decade. I showered, changed into a sharp navy blue power suit, and left the apartment before Spencer even stirred from his drunken, exhausted sleep on the living room sofa. The morning commute to my downtown Chicago auditing firm was unusually peaceful. I felt the profound, icy clarity that comes with holding all the winning cards. I walked into the sleek, glass-walled lobby of my corporate building at exactly 8 o'clock. I nodded to the security guards, grabbed my usual black coffee from the lobby cafe, and headed up to the 42nd floor. I spent the first hour of my workday organizing the digital files I had pulled the night before. I sent a securely encrypted copy to a contact I trusted at the Federal Bureau of Investigation and another copy to my personal wealth management attorney. I was just hitting print on the summary page when the chaotic shouting started. The noise echoed all the way up the central elevator shaft and filtered into our quiet, open-plan office. My desk phone buzzed aggressively. It was Sarah, our lead receptionist from the ground floor desk. She sounded completely panicked, her breath hitching over the receiver. "Riley, you need to come down here immediately. Your family is in the lobby and they are completely out of control. They are threatening the staff." I did not rush. I did not panic. I smoothly retrieved the single page fresh from the printer tray, folded it neatly along the center crease, and stepped into the executive elevator. As the polished steel doors slid open on the ground floor, a wall of pure, unadulterated noise hit me. Beverly, Vanessa, and Jamal had somehow pushed past the outer security turnstiles. They stood in the dead center of the expansive marble lobby, completely blocking the main thoroughfare. They were surrounded by dozens of commuting professionals, early morning corporate clients, and bewildered administrative staff. It was a spectacular display of unhinged entitlement. Beverly was putting on the performance of a lifetime. Her face was flushed an angry red, and she was violently waving her designer handbag in the air like a weapon. She is hoarding millions while her husband's family starves. Beverly shrieked, her shrill voice echoing off the high ceilings and glass walls. She is a greedy, selfish manipulator who lied to her own husband. She is hiding a $5 million fortune while we face total bankruptcy. She is a monster. Vanessa stood right beside her mother, matching the manufactured hysteria frame for frame. She pointed aggressively at anyone who stopped to watch the spectacle, her eyes wide and manic. "You hear that?" Vanessa yelled at my stunned coworkers who were clutching their briefcases and coffee cups. "Your precious quiet auditor is a massive fraud. She is playing all of you, but she is going to pay. My lawyers are the absolute best in the city of Chicago. We are going to drag her through the most brutal, humiliating divorce court in Illinois history." Vanessa paced back and forth, playing to the captive audience of security guards and executives. "We will freeze every single asset she has. We will seize half of that secret trust fund, and we will leave her with absolutely nothing. She owes us for taking her in. She owes us everything." Jamal loomed behind the two women. He puffed out his chest, attempting to look physically intimidating as the building's security team began closing in on their position. He glared at the suited men around him, projecting the false confidence of a wealthy mogul, even though his financial life was currently bleeding out on my office desk upstairs. The contrast between us could not have been starker. They were red-faced, sweating and screaming like reality television contestants desperate for screen time. I was perfectly still, my breathing, even my posture immaculate. The power dynamic they had relied on for the past 5 years, the assumption that I was weak, submissive, and easily bullied, had evaporated entirely. They just did not realize it yet. Beverly noticed me first. She stopped mid-shriek, her mouth hanging open as she locked eyes with me. Her chest heaved. "See?" Beverly yelled, pointing directly at my face. "There she is, the lying snake. Are you ready to do the right thing, Riley? Are you ready to cut the check and save your marriage?" I stepped out of the elevator. The polished marble floor clicked sharply beneath my heels. A team of 3 heavily armed security guards had their radios drawn, preparing to physically escort my in-laws from the premises. I raised my left hand, gesturing calmly for the head of security to wait. I walked right up to the screaming family, perfectly composed, holding a single, freshly printed sheet of paper. The marble lobby went deathly quiet. The commuting professionals and administrative staff who had been watching Beverly's unhinged performance were now completely captivated by my absolute calm. I did not raise my voice. I did not match their manic energy. I simply extended my arm, offering the crisp sheet of paper directly to Jamal. He stared at the document as if it were coated in poison. He glanced at Vanessa, whose mouth was still open in mid-shout, and then back at the paper. "Take it, Jamal," I instructed. My voice echoed sharply off the glass walls. "This is the high-level finance you and Vanessa are always talking about. I figured you would want to review the transaction details." Jamal snatched the paper from my hand. His eyes darted across the printed text. I watched his bravado evaporate in real time. The arrogant developer who loved to flash his Rolex and mock my practical suits was suddenly struggling to breathe. The paper rustled loudly in his trembling hands. Beverly stepped forward, trying to maintain her position of power. "Do not listen to her, Jamal. She is just trying to distract us. We are taking you to court, Riley. We are taking half of everything you hid from us." I turned my gaze to my mother-in-law. "You wanted to sue me for my trust fund, Mom." I smiled, a genuine expression of absolute victory. "That is going to be exceptionally difficult. You see, a trust fund is only vulnerable in a divorce settlement if the capital is sitting idle as a liquid marital asset. But my money is not idle. My money was deployed very aggressively yesterday afternoon. Vanessa grabbed her husband's arm, her acrylic nails digging into his custom-tailored sleeve. Jamal, what does that paper say? What is she talking about? Jamal could not form the words. His jaw worked silently. The color had completely drained from his face, leaving him a sickly ashen gray. Since your husband seems to have lost his voice, I will explain it to you, Vanessa. I folded my hands neatly in front of me. Chase Bank finally realized that Jamal's South Loop development was nothing but smoke and mirrors. They grew tired of the bounced checks, the missed margin calls, and the 90-day past due notices. They classified his entire operation as a toxic liability. So right before the close of business yesterday, they packaged his $2 million commercial debt and sold it off to an independent private equity firm. Vanessa scoffed, trying to mask her rising panic with her usual condescension. So what? Debt gets sold all the time. My brother will just negotiate new terms with whoever bought it. We will restructure. We always do. I shook my head slowly. There will be no restructuring, Vanessa. The new owner of this debt invoked the acceleration clause at 8 o'clock this morning. The entire $2 million balance plus all accrued penalties and interest is due immediately. Every asset Jamal put up as collateral is now subject to immediate seizure. That includes his commercial properties, your joint bank accounts, your luxury vehicles, and the primary residence that Beverly so generously leveraged to help get his business off the ground. Beverly let out a strangled gasp. She stumbled backward, bumping into the security turnstile. My house. Jamal, tell me she is lying. Tell me my house is safe. Jamal did not look at her. He kept his eyes locked on the paper. The stamp at the top of the page showed a certified electronic wire transfer clearing an enormous sum of cash. The purchasing entity was listed as a private holding corporation. He looked up at me, his eyes wide bloodshot and completely terrified. The confident mogul was gone, replaced by a broken, desperate man who realized his entire life was over. Who bought it? Jamal choked out. His voice cracked, sounding like a frightened child. Which firm bought the debt? I took one step closer to him, invading his personal space. I lowered my voice to a whisper, ensuring only the three of them could hear the final devastating truth. I am the private equity firm, Jamal, I stated clearly. I bought your debt. I own your loans. I own your bank accounts. I own your cars. I own Beverly's house. I own you. Vanessa snatched the paper from Jamal's limp fingers. She stared at the corporate name listed as the purchaser. It matched the name of the trust fund her private investigator had uncovered. The realization hit her with the force of a freight train. The drab, boring auditor she had mocked for 5 years had just legally purchased her entire existence. You cannot do this, Vanessa shrieked, dropping the paper as if it burned her. This is illegal. You cannot just buy our debt and demand payment in one day. We are your family. You stopped being my family the moment you tried to forge my signature and steal my home, I replied, stepping back to address all three of them. You wanted to play corporate games with a forensic auditor. You wanted to hustle like the true elites. Well, welcome to the big leagues. I turned to the head of building security, who was watching the scene with wide eyes. Gentlemen, these 3 individuals are trespassing. They have no business in this building. Please escort them off the premises immediately. If they resist, call the Chicago Police Department and have them arrested for creating a public disturbance. Beverly lunged forward, her hands outstretched, tears ruining her expensive makeup. Riley, please. You cannot take my home. Where will I go? I am your mother-in-law. You have to forgive us. We were just desperate. I looked at Beverly with absolute indifference. My empathy had dried up the moment I read their emails plotting my financial ruin. You should have thought about that before you handed me that manila folder last night, Beverly. Actions have consequences. The security guards moved in, flanking the 3 of them. Jamal did not resist. He let the guards turn him toward the glass doors, moving like a sleepwalker. Vanessa tried to shove a guard away, screaming obscenities, but 2 officers firmly grabbed her arms and began marching her out of the lobby. Beverly trailed behind them, sobbing loudly, her perfect suburban facade completely obliterated. I stood in the center of the lobby and watched them get shoved through the revolving glass doors and out onto the cold Chicago pavement. The audience of coworkers and commuters began to murmur, the tension in the room finally breaking. I did not stay to answer their questions. I turned around, swiped my security badge at the turnstile, and walked back to the executive elevator. I had a 9 o'clock meeting with my legal team, and I had absolutely no intention of being late. As I waited for the executive elevator doors to slide open, I paused and glanced back through the massive glass walls of the lobby. The spectacle was far from over. Out on the cold Chicago pavement, the reality of the situation had finally pierced Jamal's arrogant skull. The greed trap had snapped completely shut, and the fallout was instantaneous. Through the thick soundproof glass, I watched the power dynamic violently invert. Jamal was no longer the composed, wealthy developer looking down his nose at my practical suits. He was a cornered, desperate animal facing total annihilation. He rounded on Vanessa, his face contorted with unchecked rage, screaming at her right there on the busy sidewalk in front of dozens of onlookers. I could not hear the exact words, but his frantic, aggressive gestures made it perfectly clear. He was cursing her and Beverly for their relentless cruelty, blaming them for insulting and alienating the one person holding the literal keys to his financial survival. Vanessa shrank back, her haughty, elite demeanor entirely gone, replaced by genuine, trembling terror. Beverly tried to intervene, placing a placating maternal hand on Jamal's chest, but he violently swatted it away. He paced back and forth, dragging his hands over his face, completely unhinged. He realized that his wife's vicious mouth had just cost him his entire empire. The elevator arrived with a soft chime. I stepped inside and rode up to the 42nd floor. My meeting with the legal team was efficient, cold, and utterly ruthless. We spent the morning drafting the preliminary foreclosure notices and preparing the formal asset seizure protocols. I instructed my attorneys to initiate the legal freeze on all of Jamal's commercial holding accounts by noon. I wanted his credit lines severed and his operating cash completely locked down before he even had a chance to call his own lawyers. It was exactly 3 o'clock in the afternoon when my desk phone buzzed again. It was Sarah from the ground floor reception desk. She sounded much calmer this time, though heavily tinged with bewilderment. "Riley, your husband is here. He is completely frantic and begging to see you. He has a massive bouquet of flowers and says it is a life-or-death emergency." I smiled, leaning back in my ergonomic desk chair. Right on schedule. I told Sarah I would be right down. I took my time finishing a budget review email, forcing him to wait before descending to the lobby. When the elevator doors opened, the sight waiting for me was almost pathetic enough to evoke pity if I had any left to give. Spencer was pacing the waiting area, clutching 3 dozen long-stemmed red roses. The moment he saw me step out of the elevator, he practically sprinted across the marble floor and literally dropped to his knees, right in front of the reception desk. "Riley, please!" he sobbed loudly. Real wet tears streamed down his face, a performance worthy of an Academy Award. "Please, you have to listen to me. I am so sorry. I was completely out of my mind last night. My mother brainwashed me. She and Vanessa have been in my ear for months, telling me Jamal's project was a sure thing, telling me that borrowing against the house was just a temporary family favor. I never wanted to do it. I swear to you, I never wanted to lie to you or steal from you." He grabbed the hem of my navy suit jacket, his knuckles white with desperation. "We have been together for 5 years, Riley. 5 beautiful years of marriage. You are my entire world. I know I messed up, but you know my mother. You know how manipulative she can be. She convinced me that keeping the loan a secret was the only way to protect our future. Please, baby, do not throw away everything we have built over one terrible mistake. Give me a second chance. I will cut them off entirely. I will do whatever you want. Just please do not destroy us." I stared down at the man kneeling on the floor. It was an absolute masterclass in toxic manipulation. He was not apologizing for trying to forge my signature and steal my home. He was not apologizing for his explosive, threatening rage the night before when he realized I had money he could not touch. He was just terrified because he realized I held all the financial power and he was furiously trying to throw his own mother and sister under the bus to save himself. He thought his tears and our 5-year history could wipe away the fact that he saw me as nothing more than a bank account to be plundered. I let a heavy sigh escape my lips, feigning total emotional exhaustion. I let my shoulders slump slightly, playing the part of the tired, heartbroken wife who just wanted peace and a resolution. "Okay, Spencer," I said, my voice softening just enough to give him false hope. "I will restructure Jamal's debt. I will stop the immediate asset seizures and help the family figure a way out of this colossal mess." Spencer's head snapped up, his eyes widening with profound relief. A triumphant gleam flashed across his face, so brief that anyone else would have missed it. "Oh my God, Riley, thank you!" he gasped, scrambling to his feet and trying to shove the massive bouquet of roses into my arms. "You will not regret this. I promise you. I love you so much." I held up a hand, refusing the flowers, and stopping him from pulling me into a hug. "But there is a strict condition," I stated, my tone returning to absolute professional neutrality. "I am not doing this on a handshake, and I am not doing this with any more secrets. You, Beverly, Vanessa, and Jamal all have to meet me at my lawyer's office on Monday morning at exactly 9 o'clock. You will all sign full transparency disclosures under penalty of perjury. Every bank account, every hidden asset, every outstanding loan, every piece of property. Everything goes on the table. No more lies, Spencer. If anyone hides a single dime, the deal is off, and I execute the debt collection immediately." Spencer nodded eagerly, practically vibrating with relief. He thought he had won. "Yes, absolutely," he agreed, wiping his wet face with his sleeve. "Monday morning. We will all be there. Full transparency. I promise, Riley. No more lies." I turned and walked back to the elevators, leaving him standing alone in the lobby with his useless roses. He thought he had just manipulated his way out of total ruin by playing on my emotions. He had absolutely no idea that the transparency disclosures he just agreed to were the final fatal trap I needed to permanently destroy them. I left the office early on Friday afternoon and went straight back to the apartment. Spencer had wisely made himself scarce, probably hiding out at his mother's house to strategize their survival. That gave me exactly what I needed: uninterrupted time and total silence. I locked the front door, engaged the deadbolt, and retreated into my home office. I fired up my secure laptop and logged back into the tracing software. The trap was set for Monday, but I needed to know exactly how they were reacting to the pressure. Criminals facing ruin rarely sit still. They panic, and in their panic, they make mistakes. My monitors hummed to life, displaying the real-time financial dashboards I had linked to their accounts. I spent the entire weekend anchored to my desk, surviving on black coffee and adrenaline. The digital trail they were leaving was nothing short of spectacular. They actually believed that breaking up large sums of money would evade detection. It is a rookie move called structuring, and to a forensic auditor, it lights up a monitoring system like a fireworks display. Starting late Friday night, I watched the flurry of digital activity unfold. Spencer and Vanessa were desperately trying to salvage whatever liquid cash they could access before Monday's disclosure meeting. I tracked a series of rapid-fire transfers moving from Jamal's remaining corporate accounts into a shell LLC registered in Delaware. From there, the money was being sliced into increments of exactly $9,900, deliberately staying just under the federal reporting threshold. They were wiring these chunks to a small, unregulated offshore bank in the Cayman Islands. It was almost funny watching them attempt high-level money laundering with the finesse of amateurs. Every single transfer they authorized left a digital fingerprint complete with IP addresses, routing numbers, and time-stamped confirmations. They thought they were building a secret life raft. They were actually handing me a documented trail of intentional asset concealment. Every dollar they moved offshore was another count of fraud I could add to my final report. I let the software run its automated capture algorithms, saving every packet of data to a secure external drive. By Saturday evening, I had cataloged their offshore movements perfectly. but a nagging instinct told me I had not seen everything yet. Spencer's desperation in the lobby had felt too intense, too personal. It was not just about saving his brother-in-law or his mother's house. He was hiding something else, something directly tied to me. I expanded my search parameters, running my own social security number through a deep credit sweep, bypassing the standard consumer reports, and accessing the raw institutional data. The results populated on my screen, and the air in the room suddenly felt very cold. I stared at the lines of red text, my hands freezing over the keyboard. Spencer had not just attempted to forge my signature on a commercial mortgage. He had been actively stealing my identity for over 2 years. There were 4 credit cards opened in my name, routed to a post office box 2 towns over, so I would never see the physical mail. The balances were completely maxed out. He had racked up $80,000 in high-interest debt, all legally tied to my social security number. I pulled the transaction histories for each card. The purchases painted a sickening picture of his double life. There were massive cash advances, presumably to float Jamal's failing business, when the Ponzi scheme needed a quick injection of liquidity. But the rest of the charges were purely for Spencer's own lavish lifestyle. He had funded expensive dinners at downtown steakhouses, weekend trips to luxury resorts, and high-end golf club memberships, all while letting me pay the rent and utility bills on our apartment. He had been playing the role of the wealthy, successful sales director, entirely financed by my stolen credit. I sat back in my chair, the glow of the monitors reflecting off my face. Any lingering trace of grief over my broken marriage evaporated, replaced by a cold, calculating rage. This was not a misguided attempt to help family. This was calculated, sustained predatory theft. He had weaponized my perfect credit score to fund his ego, fully prepared to let me take the fall if the debt ever collapsed. He had shared my bed, kissed my cheek, and planned a future with me, all while systematically siphoning my financial stability behind my back. He thought the transparency disclosures on Monday were just about Jamal's business and Beverly's house. He thought if he could just hide a little cash offshore and cry in my office lobby, he could reset the board and go back to manipulating me. He thought I was just preparing for a high-conflict divorce. I spent Sunday methodically formatting the evidence. I did not just save the files, I printed them. The laser printer in the corner of my office hummed steadily for hours, spitting out page after page of undeniable proof. I created separate, meticulously indexed binders, one for Jamal's fraudulent commercial loans, one for Beverly's leveraged assets, one for the offshore structuring Vanessa and Spencer were currently executing, and a final thick binder dedicated entirely to Spencer's identity theft and wire fraud. I stacked the binders neatly on my desk, running my hand over the smooth covers. The paper trail was flawless. It traced every lie, every stolen dollar, and every forged signature directly back to them. As the sun set over the Chicago skyline on Sunday evening, casting long shadows across my office, I smiled. I was not just preparing for a divorce, I was preparing a federal criminal dossier. The Monday morning sun reflected blindingly off the glass facade of the downtown high-rise that housed my legal team. The law offices of Vance and Associates occupied the entire 50th floor, a physical testament to high-stakes corporate and family litigation. The aesthetic was deliberate intimidation, all polished mahogany, brushed steel, and floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a dizzying view of Lake Michigan. I arrived an hour early, slipping through the private executive entrance to meet with Marcus, my lead attorney, and the special guests I had arranged for the occasion. I stood in the darkened observation room adjoining the main conference room. Through the soundproof one-way glass, I had a perfect view of the reception area. I watched them arrive exactly at 9 o'clock. They stepped off the main elevator, moving like a conquering royal family. They had clearly spent Sunday convincing themselves that my demand for transparency was nothing more than a minor hurdle, a final hoop to jump through before my cash started flowing into their accounts. They were dressed to the nines, projecting a wealthy facade built entirely on lies and stolen money. Beverly wore a tailored Chanel suit. She definitely could not afford her hair freshly blown out and perfectly stiff. Vanessa wore an oversized designer coat clutching a crocodile skin handbag she had probably purchased with Jamal's fraudulent commercial deposits. Jamal was back to his faux mogul aesthetic, sporting a ridiculous silk pocket square and a heavy gold watch. Spencer led the pack, his chest puffed out, radiating the smug confidence of a man who believed his tearful lobby performance had successfully manipulated his naive wife. The receptionist, a poised woman named Elena, asked for their names. Beverly did not just answer. She announced herself. "We are the Blackwood family," Beverly said loudly, ensuring her shrill voice carried across the quiet, sophisticated reception area. "We are here to see my daughter-in-law Riley. She is setting up a massive financial restructuring for us. She is a very obedient girl when push comes to shove. We just had to remind her of her familial obligations and where her loyalties belong." Elena simply smiled a tight professional smile and gestured toward the heavy double doors of the main conference room. "Please have a seat. She will be right with you." They filed into the room. The space was designed to humble people, but instead of being intimidated by the massive mahogany table and the severe corporate artwork, they treated it like their own private VIP lounge. I remained in the observation room with Marcus, tapping into the room's discreet audio feed. Spencer immediately took the seat at the head of the table. He leaned back, lacing his fingers behind his head, looking like a CEO holding court. "I told you she would fold," Spencer said, his voice dripping with absolute arrogance. "She just needed to throw a little tantrum to feel like she was in control. She likes to use those scary auditor words, but at the end of the day she is terrified of losing me. She knows she is nothing without this family." Vanessa pulled out a compact mirror and checked her lipstick, completely unbothered by the fact that her husband was facing millions in defaulted loans. "We just need to make sure the bailout cash is routed directly into the new Delaware holding accounts," Vanessa whispered excitedly, snapping the compact shut. "We cannot let her trace the funds once the transfer clears. If she thinks she is paying off the Chase Bank debt, let her think that. We take the liquidity, cover the immediate margin calls, and funnel the rest straight to the Cayman accounts." Jamal nodded, tapping his fingers nervously but greedily on the wood grain. "Exactly. The bailout money goes into the LLC. She signs the financial disclosure agreements, we sign whatever useless non-disclosure paperwork her lawyer wants, and we are back in business by Wednesday. We just have to humor her little power trip today." Beverly laughed, a sharp, grating sound that made my skin crawl. "She thinks she holds all the cards just because she has a little trust fund she kept hidden. It is adorable, really. Spencer, you played her perfectly yesterday. Once the money is secured and the immediate debts are off our backs, we will figure out how to compel her to completely liquidate that account. A wife should not be keeping secrets from her husband anyway. It is unnatural. We will get the rest of it eventually." Listening to them actively plot to steal the money they thought I was surrendering was the final confirmation I needed. There was no remorse. There was no hesitation. They were parasites through and through. They were so blinded by their own greed and bottomless entitlement that they could not see the massive steel trap hovering right above their throats. They actually believed they were the smartest people in the room. Marcus looked at me, raising a single questioning eyebrow. I gave him a sharp nod. It was time to end this. I smoothed the lapels of my tailored charcoal suit, took a deep, steadying breath, and reached for the brass handle of the connecting door. The heavy double doors of the conference room swung open with a resounding thud that echoed off the glass walls. The excited whispering stopped instantly. 4 heads snapped in my direction. Spencer immediately adopted a mask of gentle, loving concern. He stood up hurriedly, buttoning his suit jacket, preparing to play the role of the devoted, penitent husband. "Riley, sweetheart," Spencer said, taking a step forward with his arms open wide. "We are all here, just like you asked. We are ready to put everything on the table and move forward as a family. No more secrets." I stepped into the room, my heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floor. I did not speak. I did not smile. I simply took 2 steps inside and moved aside, leaving the wide doorway perfectly clear. Marcus walked in behind me. He was carrying the 4 thick, meticulously indexed binders I had compiled over the weekend. He dropped them onto the center of the mahogany table with a heavy final slam. The sound made Jamal flinch in his leather chair. But Marcus was not the only person accompanying me. Walking in directly behind my divorce attorney were two uniformed Chicago police officers, their hands resting casually on their duty belts, their expressions stern and unreadable. And stepping through the doorway, last his eyes scanning the room with cold professional precision, was a tall man wearing a navy blue windbreaker. Across the back and chest of the jacket, printed in bold, unmistakable yellow lettering, were the letters FBI. Spencer froze mid-step, his arms dropping limply to his sides. The false, loving smile slid entirely off his face, replaced by a mask of absolute paralyzing terror. The silence in the room was absolute, heavy, and suffocating. The smug, triumphant smiles that had plastered the faces of the Blackwood family just seconds prior evaporated instantly. The transition was jarring. One moment they were untouchable elites plotting their next vacation, and the next they were cornered suspects facing the reality of federal law enforcement. Beverly was the first to break the silence. Her haughty demeanor flared up a desperate defense mechanism against the sudden shift in power. She pushed her chair back, the legs scraping loudly against the hardwood, and glared at Marcus, then at the officers. "What is the meaning of this?" she demanded, her voice shrill and trembling. "Riley, tell these people to leave immediately. This is a private family meeting regarding our financial restructuring. You have no right to bring security into this room." I did not even look at her. I walked past Spencer, whose chest was heaving with rapid, shallow breaths, and took my seat at the absolute head of the mahogany table. Marcus stood to my right, unpacking the massive binders I had compiled over the weekend. The two Chicago police officers moved to flank the double doors, crossing their arms and blocking the only exit. The FBI agent, a man named Agent Vance, stepped further into the room and stood silently by the wall, his gaze tracking every movement Jamal made. "You wanted transparency," I said, my voice completely devoid of emotion. It cut through the room like a blade. "I brought the people who specialize in it." Beverly opened her mouth to protest again, but Agent Vance raised a single hand, pointing a stern finger at her. "Ma'am, I suggest you sit down and remain quiet," he instructed, his tone radiating absolute federal authority. "This is an active investigation." Beverly sank back into her leather chair, her face draining of color. She looked at Jamal, waiting for her successful son-in-law to take charge, to use his wealth and connections to throw these people out. But Jamal was not looking at her. He was staring at the thick black folder I was sliding across the polished mahogany table directly toward him. "Open it," I commanded, leaning forward and resting my forearms on the table. Jamal hesitated. His hands, usually so smooth and confident, were visibly shaking. He reached out his heavy gold watch, catching the light, and flipped open the cover of the black folder. He stared at the first page, his eyes darting frantically back and forth as he read the legal jargon. A bead of sweat formed on his forehead, rolling down his temple and soaking into the collar of his expensive silk shirt. "It is the foreclosure notice," I stated, ensuring my voice carried to every corner of the silent room. "But that is just the beginning of your problems, Jamal. Because I spent my entire weekend doing a forensic audit of your corporate accounts. You did not just default on your bank loans due to a bad market. You have been running a textbook Ponzi scheme for 3 years." Vanessa gasped loudly, clutching her crocodile skin handbag against her chest. "Jamal, what is she talking about? Tell her she is lying. He is not going to tell you anything, Vanessa, because he knows I have the receipts." I replied, my gaze fixed intensely on Jamal. "You diverted over $4 million from your primary investment fund. You used your investors' pension funds to buy that Rolex and Vanessa's sports cars." Jamal opened his mouth, trying to formulate a defense, trying to spin a lie, but his throat was completely dry. He swallowed hard, letting out a weak, pathetic sound. "You do not understand," he rasped. "It was a bridge loan. I was going to pay the fund back as soon as the downtown development cleared zoning. It was just temporary liquidity." "There is no downtown development, Jamal," I snapped back, slamming my hand onto the table. "I pulled the zoning records. The permits were denied 6 months ago. You knew the project was dead, but you kept taking investor capital anyway. And then when the walls started closing in last week, you panicked. I turned my attention to Vanessa, whose face was completely ashen. She looked like she was about to vomit right onto the mahogany table. "And you, Vanessa," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You thought you were so clever this weekend, didn't you? Sitting in your luxury apartment breaking transfers into increments of exactly $9,900 to avoid federal reporting triggers." Vanessa let out a strangled cry, her hands flying to cover her mouth. Spencer, who was still standing paralyzed near the door, groaned audibly. "Did you really think the FBI does not monitor structured transfers to unregulated offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands?" I asked, letting a cold smile touch my lips. "You wired over $200,000 of stolen investor money into a Shell LLC between Friday night and Sunday morning. That is called structuring, Vanessa. It is a federal crime, and it carries a mandatory minimum sentence." Agent Vance stepped forward slightly, pulling a folded document from his windbreaker pocket. "Mr. Davis," he said, addressing Jamal directly, "as of 8 o'clock this morning, a federal judge signed a seizure order for all assets associated with your name, your wife's name, and your corporate entities. The FBI froze your remaining accounts at 8 a.m. We seized the Cayman routing numbers. You are completely locked out of the global financial system." Jamal slumped forward in his chair, putting his head in his hands. He let out a long, ragged sob. The untouchable real estate developer was gone, replaced by a broken criminal realizing he was about to lose his freedom. Beverly was hyperventilating now, clutching the pearls at her neck. "But my house," she choked out, looking wildly from Jamal to me. "Jamal, you promised my house was protected. You said the collateral loan was just a formality." I pulled the second binder toward me, the one labeled with Beverly's name. I flipped it open, revealing the original loan documents featuring her signature alongside Jamal's. "Your house was the collateral that kept him out of prison for an extra 6 months, Beverly," I explained clinically. "He leveraged your entire estate to pay off his earliest investors before they reported him to the SEC. You signed the guarantor paperwork. You handed him the deed. As of this morning, the bank has initiated the seizure of your property. You have exactly 30 days to vacate the premises before the marshals physically remove you." Beverly let out a piercing shriek, burying her face in her hands and sobbing hysterically. Her pristine, elitist world had just been nuked from orbit. She was losing her mansion, her social status, and her wealthy son-in-law all in the span of 5 minutes. But the show was not quite over. I slowly turned my head, locking eyes with Spencer. He was sweating profusely, his face the color of chalk. He was backing away, slowly inching toward the door, but the 2 Chicago police officers shifted their stance, completely blocking his path. He knew. He knew exactly what was in the final binder resting on the table. "You promised us a restructuring," Riley Spencer stammered, his voice cracking with desperation. "You said if we were transparent today you would help us. You promised." I smiled, leaning back in my chair, savoring the absolute destruction of the men who thought they could ruin me. "I promised I would bring the people who specialize in transparency." "Spencer," I replied coldly. "And I did. But Jamal and Vanessa are not the only ones who have been stealing, are they? Let us talk about the 4 credit cards opened under my social security number. Let us talk about the $80,000 in wire fraud. Let us talk about how you are leaving this building in handcuffs today." The room plunged into a suffocating silence after my words hung in the air. Spencer stared at me, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish. He looked frantically at the 2 Chicago police officers blocking the door, realizing that his tears and cheap apologies were completely useless here. Before he could even formulate a pathetic lie or attempt another tearful manipulation, the fragile alliance holding this family of grifters together violently shattered. The sheer magnitude of federal involvement had finally pierced their collective delusion. They were no longer a united front plotting my ruin. They were cornered rats on a sinking ship, fully prepared to cannibalize each other to survive. Jamal violently pushed his chair back. The heavy mahogany legs scraped loudly and aggressively against the floorboards as he surged to his feet. His polished, arrogant composure was entirely gone. The faux mogul aesthetic he had cultivated for years melted away, leaving behind nothing but a frantic, desperate fraud. He rounded on his wife, his face contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. He pointed a shaking finger directly at Vanessa. "You ruined me!" Jamal screamed, his voice echoing sharply off the soundproof glass walls. "You and your pathetic, scheming family ruined my entire life. You told me she was going to sign the papers. You told me your idiot brother had it all under control. I trusted you to secure the capital, and instead you led the federal government straight to my doorstep." Vanessa shrank back into her seat, holding her designer handbag like a physical shield. She looked terrified, completely unprepared for the explosive wrath of the man she had been boasting about just 10 minutes prior. Agent Vance stepped away from the door, his hand resting casually but purposefully near his waist. "Sit down, Mr. Davis," he commanded. His voice did not need to be loud to project absolute, unwavering authority. "Keep your hands where I can see them and remain seated. This is your only warning before you are physically restrained." Jamal hesitated for a fraction of a second before complying. He collapsed back into his leather chair, but the emotional dam had completely burst. The illusion of the untouchable African-American real estate titan disintegrated right in front of us. He ran his hands over his face, dragging his fingers through his hair, sobbing loudly and openly. He was entirely indifferent to who was watching. The sheer terror of his impending arrest broke him, and he began to confess everything in a rapid, frantic stream of consciousness. "I have been broke for years." Jamal cried out, his shoulders shaking wildly. The downtown projects, the commercial complexes, the luxury developments, all of it was just smoke and mirrors. "I was drowning. I have been moving money from new investors just to pay the margins on the old ones. The feds have been sniffing around my holding companies for months. I knew the indictments were coming. I was terrified." He looked up, his eyes wild and bloodshot, glaring viciously at Spencer. "When Spencer said he could access your credit lines and leverage your hidden trust fund, it was my only way out. He promised me he could steal enough to cover my margin calls and keep me out of federal prison. He swore you were too busy with work to ever notice the missing funds. I was relying entirely on his theft to survive. I never wanted to hurt you, Riley. I just needed the cash to stay afloat. They forced me into this corner." Vanessa shrieked, a high-pitched, piercing sound of pure horror. She stared at Jamal as if she had never seen him before in her entire life. She was realizing in real time that the luxurious lifestyle she had flaunted, the designer clothes she wore like armor, and the wealthy husband she paraded around to belittle everyone else, were nothing but a criminal facade. She was married to a broke felon. Her own brother had been operating as his accomplice, and their entire existence was built on stolen money. "My God," Vanessa gasped, hyperventilating as she clutched her chest. "You have nothing. All those trips, the cars, the investments. You are bankrupt. I am going to lose everything because of you. You are a fraud. You dragged me into a federal investigation." Beverly let out a sharp, mocking sound. It was a nervous scoff disguised as a haughty laugh as she watched her daughter's marriage spectacularly implode. She adjusted her posture, trying to maintain her air of superiority even as the walls closed in around her children. She clearly thought that because Jamal was the mastermind and Spencer was the thief, her own hands were relatively clean. She believed her status as the respected matriarch would somehow shield her from the fallout of their catastrophic stupidity. "Look at this absolute mess," Beverly sneered, shaking her head and glaring at Jamal. "I always knew you were a fast talker, Jamal, but dragging my children into your financial ruin is unforgivable. And you, Spencer, getting caught like a common criminal. This is deeply embarrassing for our family name." I did not let Beverly enjoy her false sense of security for even a second. I reached across the table and picked up the second heavy black folder from the stack Marcus had brought in. I slid it firmly across the smooth mahogany surface, letting it come to a complete stop right in front of Beverly's perfectly manicured hands. "Do not laugh at him, Vanessa," I said, my voice cold, precise, and completely devoid of mercy. "You and Mom are next." Beverly stared at the black folder resting innocuously on the polished wood. Her hands, usually so expressive and draped in heavy gold rings, were frozen. The arrogant sneer that had defined her entire existence was completely gone, replaced by a hollow, sinking dread. She looked up at me, her eyes begging for this to be some elaborate, cruel joke. I did not blink. I simply tapped my index finger against the mahogany table, commanding her to look. She reached out with trembling, manicured hands. Her perfectly painted acrylic nails clicked frantically against the heavy cardstock as she flipped the cover open. The first page was a highly detailed, legally notarized document she recognized instantly. It was the deed to her sprawling suburban mansion, the house she had used for decades to host high society garden parties, the fortress of her social standing, and the ultimate symbol of the family's supposed generational wealth. But across the top of the deed was a heavy red ink stamp indicating a full transfer of lien and an assignment of debt. Beverly squinted, trying to make sense of the federal banking stamps and the attached commercial loan schedules. She shook her head, a strained, nervous chuckle escaping her lips. "I do not understand," she stammered, looking toward Spencer for translation. "This is the deed to my house. Why do you have my deed, Riley?" I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table and interlacing my fingers. "Did you know Spencer secretly collateralized your house a year ago to fund Jamal's Ponzi scheme?" The words dropped into the room like an anvil. Beverly's breath hitched violently. She snapped her head toward her son, her eyes wide with total, unadulterated betrayal. Spencer physically recoiled, shrinking back against the glass wall of the conference room, refusing to meet her gaze. He stared intently at his expensive leather shoes, his face flushed with cowardly shame. "He told you he just needed your signature for a routine background check to clear a minor business hurdle." I continued, my voice steady and surgical, dissecting the fraud step by step. "He slipped a blanket commercial guarantee into a stack of routine paperwork you signed without reading. You signed away the entire equity of your home to secure a bridge loan for Jamal. They needed liquidity to pay off early investors who were threatening to go to the authorities. Your son used your home as a human shield to buy his brother-in-law another 12 months of fake success." Beverly let out a strangled gasp, clutching the folder to her chest, as if she could physically protect the house by holding the paper. "Spencer," she rasped, her voice breaking. "Tell me she is lying. Tell me you did not mortgage my home." Spencer tried to speak, but only a pathetic, raspy squeak escaped his throat. He trembled violently, pressing his back against the glass wall, as if trying to merge with it and disappear. He could not even look his mother in the eye. He had prioritized his own fake image over her security, willingly signing away her legacy just to maintain his illusion of wealth for a few more months. His silence was a deafening confirmation. Vanessa, who had been sobbing quietly in her chair, suddenly realized the full scope of the devastation. "Mom, we are ruined," she cried out, her voice cracking into a shrill, panicked whine. "Jamal's accounts are frozen. The feds are going to seize our cars and our apartment. We were going to move in with you. If the bank takes your house, we literally have nowhere to go. We are going to be on the street." "The bank is not going to seize it, Vanessa," I interjected, keeping my tone deadly calm. Beverly's head snapped back to me, a desperate, pathetic flare of hope lighting up her eyes. She thought my statement meant the house was somehow safe, that I had used my financial expertise to fix the collateral damage. She actually believed, even after everything, that I was still the obedient daughter-in-law, stepping in to save them from their own catastrophic greed. "Oh, Riley." Beverly exhaled, tears freely spilling over her ruined mascara. "Thank you. I knew you would not let us lose the family home. I knew you would restructure the debt." I stared at her, marveling at the absolute depth of her delusion. "You misunderstood me, Beverly," I said, my voice dropping to a harsh, icy register. "When the bridge loan defaulted last month, the commercial lender initiated an immediate aggressive asset seizure. They were going to auction your house off to a corporate developer in a matter of weeks. I did not fix the loan. I bought that note too." Beverly froze, her jaw dropping slightly. Her eyes darted rapidly across my face, trying to process the meaning of my words. "I used my own private capital to purchase the distressed debt directly from the primary lender for pennies on the dollar," I explained slowly, ensuring every single syllable landed with maximum impact. "I am not your financial advisor, Beverly. I am not your obedient daughter-in-law. I am the sole owner of the holding company that now possesses the deed to your property. I own the ground you walk on. I own the roof over your head." Beverly started hyperventilating. Her chest heaved dramatically as she gasped for air. Her hands flew to her throat, her perfectly manicured nails digging into her own skin. The realization that I, the woman she had relentlessly mocked, belittled, and treated like a personal ATM, now held absolute unchecked power over her basic survival, was physically destroying her. She looked at the two Chicago police officers standing by the door, then at the FBI agent, finally understanding why they were here. They were not just here for Jamal and Spencer. They were here to enforce my legal rights. "You cannot do this!" Beverly shrieked, her voice reaching an unbearable frantic pitch as she pointed a shaking finger at me. "You are family. You cannot put a 65-year-old woman out on the street. It is inhumane. You cannot do this to family." I did not blink. I did not flinch. I felt absolutely nothing for the woman crying hysterically across the table. "You have exactly 24 hours to pack your things and vacate my property, Beverly," I stated, my voice echoing with absolute unyielding finality. "The police officers behind you will be escorting you to the house to ensure the eviction process begins immediately. You may take your clothing and your personal effects, but if you try to take the art, the furniture, or if you steal so much as a light bulb on your way out, I will have you arrested for theft and destruction of property." Beverly's mouth snapped shut. The air left her lungs in a sharp, painful hiss. She slumped back into her chair, finally broken, her eyes darting frantically around the room, as if searching for a hidden camera or a legal loophole that simply did not exist. There was no socialite charm left, no haughty arrogance to wield like a weapon. She was just a defeated, terrified woman realizing she was utterly destitute, entirely dependent on the mercy of the daughter-in-law she had relentlessly abused. With the matriarch neutralized, my gaze shifted to the man sitting at the head of the table. The man who had vowed to protect and cherish me, only to view me as a gullible mark and a walking ATM for his fraudulent family. Spencer was a spectacular mess. The smug confidence he had carried into the room had completely liquefied. He was deathly pale, his skin possessing the sickly translucent sheen of a cornered animal. Sweat poured down his face in heavy rivulets, soaking through the crisp collar of his expensive custom-tailored shirt and leaving dark, embarrassing patches under his arms. He was trembling so violently that the heavy mahogany table actually vibrated beneath his hands. Seeing that his mother and his supposedly genius brother-in-law had been utterly decimated, Spencer reverted to his only remaining tactic. He tried to play the victim. He tried to play the devoted, misunderstood partner who had simply made a few misguided mistakes out of love. He lunged forward in his chair, leaning across the wide expanse of polished wood, extending a shaking hand toward mine. Tears spilled freely down his cheeks, a pathetic display of manufactured grief designed to manipulate my emotions one last time. "Riley, baby, please." Spencer wept openly, his voice cracking into a high, desperate whine. "You cannot do this. I am your husband. We took vows. I love you. Everything I did because I was trying to save this family. I was trying to protect our future. Please just listen to me. Give me a chance to explain." I did not feel an ounce of sympathy. I felt only pure, unadulterated disgust. As his sweaty fingers neared mine, I effortlessly pulled my hand back, dodging his touch as if he were carrying a contagious disease. My expression remained an impenetrable mask of ice. "Do not ever touch me again," I commanded softly. The absolute revulsion in my voice made him flinch physically, snapping his hand back to his chest as if he had been burned. I reached to my right and picked up the fourth and final folder. It was by far the thickest binder of the entire collection, heavy with the weight of his systematic, calculated betrayals. I slammed it down onto the table with a resounding thud and slid it firmly across the smooth surface. It stopped perfectly squarely in front of him. "Open it, Spencer," I ordered. He stared at the black cover as if it were an explosive device waiting to detonate. He slowly reached out with trembling fingers and flipped it open. His red tear-filled eyes immediately locked onto the first document sitting on top of the massive stack of paper. "Divorce papers," I announced, watching the last remaining shred of hope die in his eyes. already filed completely ironclad, inciting irreconcilable financial infidelity. But that is the absolute least of your concerns right now. Turn the page. He fumbled with the heavy stock paper, his hands shaking so severely he nearly tore it in half. He stared at the dense color-coded spreadsheet underneath his jaw, dropping open in shock. That is evidence of wire fraud, identity theft, and embezzlement, I stated, my voice echoing loudly and clearly in the silent room. You really thought I was just some naive trust fund girl who never checked her personal accounts, didn't you? You thought I was so blinded by my love for you that I would never notice the financial discrepancies. You created a dummy shell company in Delaware, naming it Blackwood Holdings to sound legitimate, and then you used my social security number, which you stole from my private locked files, to register the LLC. Spencer was hyperventilating now, shaking his head rapidly back and forth, desperate to deny the reality closing in on him. Riley, no, I was just investing for us. I was trying to build a joint portfolio. It was for our future. You were siphoning money from my personal accounts, I snapped, cutting off his pathetic excuse with the sharp edge of the truth. I tracked every single IP address login. I found the forged electronic signatures. You initiated unauthorized transfers late at night while I was sleeping in the bed right next to you. You moved $80,000 as a test run, funneling it directly into Jamal's sinking Ponzi scheme to cover his immediate margin calls. You opened 4 separate high-limit credit cards under my name and maxed them out to fund your luxury lifestyle, leaving me legally responsible for the debt while you paraded around playing the successful businessman. Vanessa gasped from across the table, momentarily forgetting her own impending ruin. You stole from your own wife to pay Jamal, she asked, her voice dripping with absolute venom. You idiot! You dragged her federal auditors right to our doorstep. Spencer turned on his sister like a rabid dog, his survival instincts overriding any remaining family loyalty. Shut up, Vanessa! He screamed, spittle flying from his lips. Jamal told me to do it. He said he needed immediate liquidity, or we would all go down. He threatened to cut me out of the business entirely if I did not secure the capital. They made me do it, Riley. I swear to you I was manipulated by them. Jamal slammed his hands on the table, his face contorted with violent rage. I never told you to commit federal wire fraud, you absolute moron. I asked for a legitimate bridge loan. You are the one who decided to play hacker and steal her identity. Do not try to pin your sloppy, desperate felonies on me. The Blackwood family was actively tearing itself apart right in front of my eyes. The unbreakable loyalty they had weaponized against me for years had completely dissolved into a vicious, ugly scramble for self-preservation. They were turning on each other, screaming accusations and pointing fingers, utterly stripped of their fake wealth, their dignity, and their power. They were finally seeing each other for exactly what they were. I watched the chaos unfold for a few seconds, letting them tear each other to shreds before I raised my hand. The room instantly fell silent. They all looked at me, terrified of what I was going to say or do next. But I was finished talking. I had laid out the undeniable evidence. I had systematically dismantled their entire empire of lies. I had reclaimed my life, my finances, and my dignity. The trap had successfully snapped shut. I turned my head slightly and gave a single definitive nod to Agent Vance. The FBI agent stepped forward from the shadows of the wall, his heavy boots thudding menacingly against the hardwood floor. His face was a mask of professional, uncompromising law enforcement. He reached down to his duty belt and pulled out a pair of heavy steel handcuffs. The metallic clinking sound cut through the dead air of the conference room like a gunshot. Spencer froze, his eyes widening in absolute paralyzing terror as the federal agent stopped directly behind his chair. Spencer Blackwood. Agent Vance said, his voice booming with unquestionable authority. You are under arrest for federal wire fraud and conspiracy to commit bank fraud. Stand up and place your hands behind your back. Spencer let out a sound that was half gasp, half whimper. He did not stand. His legs completely gave out beneath him, turning him into dead weight in his expensive, custom-tailored suit. Agent Vance was entirely undeterred by the dramatic physical display. With practiced mechanical efficiency, the federal agent hauled Spencer up by his biceps, spun him around roughly, and locked the heavy steel cuffs around his wrists. The sharp ratcheting clicks echoed over the sudden explosion of noise in the room, acting as the final definitive gavel drop on Spencer's life of unearned privilege. Pure, unadulterated chaos erupted inside the soundproof glass walls of the conference room. The pristine corporate environment designed for high-stakes mergers and quiet, calculated negotiations was instantly transformed into a theater of total human collapse. Vanessa threw herself out of her chair, her knees hitting the hardwood floor with a painful, ungraceful smack. She was not crawling toward her husband to offer comfort, nor was she reaching out to her brother. She was clutching her crocodile skin handbag against her chest as if it were a life preserver, sobbing hysterically as the reality of her new existence crushed the breath out of her lungs. Vanessa, who just yesterday had mocked my sensible shoes and questioned my ability to understand complex finance, was now reduced to a puddle of silk and despair. The glamorous, untouchable socialite persona she had wielded like a weapon for years vanished in an instant. She was entirely penniless. The Cayman accounts were permanently frozen. Her luxury apartment was likely already cordoned off by federal investigators. The life she had built on the backs of defrauded investors was completely eradicated. "My life is over," Vanessa wailed, rocking back and forth on the floor. Her flawless blowout clung in sweaty, frantic strands to her tear-soaked face. "I have absolutely nothing left. You took it all, Riley. Where am I supposed to go tonight? I do not have a single cent to my name. You have to help me. I am your sister-in-law." Beverly completely ignored her daughter's pathetic meltdown on the floor. Her face had flushed a dangerous mottled purple, her pristine makeup cracking under the weight of her rage. She clutched desperately at the collar of her Chanel suit, pressing her hand hard against her chest as she struggled to draw breath. The same woman who had spent years telling me I lacked the sophisticated pedigree required to be a true Blackwood, who had constantly reminded me of my subordinate place in their rigid family hierarchy, was now choking on her own hubris. The impending loss of her mansion, her social standing, and her entire curated legacy was physically destroying her. Her eyes filled with absolute unfiltered venom locked onto me. "You are a demon!" Beverly shrieked, her voice cracking with pure, unrestrained hatred. She pointed a trembling manicured finger directly at my face, her heavy gold rings flashing erratically under the boardroom lights. "You planned this from the very beginning. You set us up. You brought us here under false pretenses just to humiliate us. You destroyed this family. You took everything from us. We welcomed you into our home, we gave you our name, and you tore us to pieces like a monster." I did not flinch. I did not offer a sympathetic smile, and I certainly did not offer a single word of apology. I calmly stood up from my chair at the head of the mahogany table. I smoothed the lines of my tailored charcoal suit slowly and deliberately, buttoning my jacket. I looked down at the pathetic, writhing wreckage of the people who had tormented me, belittled my career, and actively plotted to steal my future. "You spent years treating me like a naive, socially awkward accessory," I said, keeping my tone perfectly even. "You thought because I valued hard work over flashy labels I was stupid. But my quietness was not ignorance, Beverly. It was observation." I took a step away from the table, my posture rigid and commanding. "I did not destroy anything." I continued, my voice cutting through her hysterical screaming with icy surgical precision. "Your own greed and arrogance dug this grave. You built a massive house of cards on stolen money, endless entitlement, and the absolute delusion that you were smarter than everyone else in the room. You expected me to gladly hand over my life savings to keep your pathetic illusion of wealth standing. You thought I was just another mark to be exploited. I did not ruin you. I just audited the books." Beverly opened her mouth to scream another insult, but the words died in her throat as the reality of her situation finally overpowered her rage. She slumped sideways in her leather chair, her face burying into her hands as loud, ugly sobs wrecked her body. Agent Vance turned Spencer firmly toward the double doors, reciting his Miranda rights in a flat, bored monotone that contrasted sharply with the emotional devastation echoing off the glass walls. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided for you." Spencer sobbed openly, his chest heaving with every ragged breath. His head hung in absolute shame. He did not even try to look back at me, unable to face the woman he had so thoroughly betrayed as he was physically shoved toward the exit. Simultaneously, the two Chicago police officers moved in on Jamal. They grabbed the disgraced real estate mogul by both arms, hauling him roughly out of his chair. Jamal Davis, the taller officer, announced, pulling a second set of handcuffs from his belt and snapping them onto Jamal's wrists. You are being taken into custody for multiple outstanding state-level warrants related to real estate fraud, grand larceny, and operating an unlicensed financial syndicate. Let us go. Jamal did not offer a single word of protest. He did not ask for his lawyer or demand to make a phone call. He walked out of the room looking like a hollow shell of a man, his eyes vacant and entirely defeated. The sheer weight of the federal and state charges waiting for him had broken his spirit entirely. I watched them march the two men out through the heavy double doors, the distinct sound of the handcuffs clicking echoing down the silent 50th floor hallway. The room suddenly felt incredibly empty, purged of the toxic arrogance that had polluted it just moments before. I calmly picked up my briefcase, snapping the brass latches shut. I gave Marcus a brief, respectful nod of thanks for his flawless execution of the paperwork, and I turned my back on the mahogany table. "Riley, please!" Vanessa begged from the floor, her voice a desperate, gravelly croak. She reached a shaking hand toward the hem of my trousers, her mascara running down her cheeks in thick black rivers. "You cannot just leave us here like this. What are we supposed to do?" I did not pause my stride. I did not look down. I walked straight out of the conference room, my heels clicking sharply and rhythmically against the hardwood floor. The sound faded into the distance, leaving Beverly clutching her chest and crying out to an empty room, while Vanessa sobbed uncontrollably on the floor of the corporate suite they had entered like conquering royalty just 30 minutes ago. The cool wind coming off Lake Michigan hit my face the second I stepped out of the executive elevator and through the glass doors of the lobby. It felt like breathing pure oxygen for the first time in years. The heavy, suffocating weight of the Blackwood family and their endless demands had been completely lifted from my shoulders. I did not pause to look back at the towering high-rise. The next 48 hours moved with blinding, glorious speed. I did not return to the marital home I had shared with Spencer. That house was a monument to a lie, a place where I had been systematically isolated and manipulated. Instead, I directed my private driver to the Peninsula Hotel, where I had booked their top-tier corner suite weeks in advance. My luggage, carefully packed the previous weekend while Spencer was busy plotting my financial ruin, was already waiting for me. I spent the next 2 days operating with complete, unbothered efficiency. I signed the remaining affidavits, finalized the asset transfer documents with Marcus, and completely ignored the frantic, desperate calls from Spencer's criminal defense attorney seeking a settlement. There would be no settlement. There would be no quiet, swept-under-the-rug divorce. On the second evening, I sat on the plush velvet sofa in my suite, wrapped in a thick, monogrammed robe. The suite was a sanctuary of silence and soft lighting. I poured myself a cup of chamomile tea from the silver room service tray, letting the steam warm my face as I picked up the television remote. I switched the channel to the local Chicago news just in time for the prime-time evening broadcast. The anchor's face was grim, but highly animated, clearly relishing the sensational, high-profile story. Tonight, a massive federal takedown in the Chicago real estate sector, the anchor announced, her voice filling my quiet, luxurious room. Prominent developer Jamal Davis and his brother-in-law Spencer Blackwood were arrested in a dramatic, coordinated raid earlier today. Federal prosecutors allege the two men orchestrated a multi-million-dollar Ponzi scheme, defrauding dozens of local investors and attempting to launder the stolen funds through offshore shell companies. The screen cut to shaky, handheld footage captured outside the federal courthouse. There was Jamal, completely stripped of his custom Italian suits and his arrogant swagger, wearing a standard-issue orange jumpsuit. His hands were cuffed in front of him, his head bowed deeply to hide his face from the aggressive flashing cameras of the local press. Right behind him walked Spencer. My soon-to-be ex-husband looked completely broken. The smug strut he had carried into the conference room was gone, replaced by a terrified, shuffling gait. He looked incredibly small, surrounded by armed federal marshals. He looked exactly like what he was, a cowardly thief who had finally been caught in the light. The news segment detailed the entire scam with ruthless precision, outlining the frozen accounts, the seized assets, and the staggering mountain of debt Jamal had accumulated to fund his fake lifestyle. The reporter stood outside Jamal's shuttered corporate office, explaining that the FBI expected further indictments as they traced the stolen pension funds back to the victims. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my tea, savoring the delicate floral notes. The tea tasted excellent. Watching their public destruction tasted even better. While I enjoyed five-star room service and a panoramic view of the glittering Chicago skyline, Beverly and Vanessa were experiencing a radically different reality. Without my money to cushion their fall, and with all of Jamal's corporate and personal accounts frozen solid by the federal government, their descent into absolute poverty was instantaneous. The eviction process had been executed exactly as I promised. When the police and the bank's representatives arrived at Beverly's mansion, they gave her absolutely no quarter. She had tried to argue, tried to shriek, tried to drop the names of local politicians and judges she claimed to know, but her social currency was completely worthless. The officers stood by impassively, hands on their belts, as she and Vanessa were forced to cram whatever clothing they could fit into heavy black garbage bags. They were stripped of their luxury vehicles, which were seized immediately as part of the collateral recovery, and forced to call a cheap cash cab. They ended up at a rundown neon-lit motel on the far outskirts of the city, the only place that would accept cash without requiring a credit card on file or a deposit they no longer had. The contrast was beautifully poetic. Beverly, a woman who used to complain loudly if her champagne was not chilled to the exact right temperature, was now sleeping on a lumpy, stained mattress in a room that smelled of stale cigarette smoke, mildew, and cheap bleach. Vanessa, who regularly spent thousands of dollars on designer handbags to impress women she secretly hated, was now trapped in a dingy cinder-block box with peeling wallpaper, a loudly dripping faucet, and a flickering bathroom light. Their desperation set in almost immediately. My phone screen lit up relentlessly throughout the night and into the next morning. The caller ID flashed Vanessa's name over and over again. When I did not answer, she resorted to leaving a barrage of voicemails. I sat in my quiet hotel suite tapping the playback button on the first message. "Riley, please pick up." Vanessa sobbed into the receiver, her voice high-pitched, breathless, and totally stripped of her usual sneering condescension. "You have to help us. This motel is disgusting. There are roaches in the bathroom. Mom will not stop crying and her blood pressure medication is running out. We have no money. Every single one of my cards is declining. The vending machine here only takes cash, and we spent our last $20 on the taxi. We are starving, Riley. Please just wire me $500, just enough to get some food and find a better place to stay. You cannot just leave us here to rot. I am begging you." The sheer entitlement was staggering. Even from the absolute bottom of the barrel, trapped in a cheap motel room with her criminal husband in federal custody, she still believed I owed her my financial support. She still expected me to play the role of the obedient wallet, ready to dispense cash the moment she snapped her fingers and manufactured a few desperate tears. I did not even listen to the end of the message. I tapped the screen, deleting the voicemail midway through her pathetic weeping pleas. I deleted the next 3 messages without even opening them, watching them vanish from my inbox with a simple, effortless swipe of my finger. I felt no guilt. I felt no lingering sense of obligation. They were reaping the exact harvest they had spent years meticulously sowing. I stood up and walked over to the massive floor-to-ceiling window, looking out over the sprawling city below. My phone buzzed again, vibrating against the smooth marble table, but this time it was Marcus. I answered on the first ring. "Good morning, Riley," Marcus said, his voice crisp, efficient, and thoroughly professional. "The asset seizures are fully complete. The bank has officially handed over the Blackwood estate deed to your holding company, and the offshore Cayman accounts have been legally seized and repatriated by the federal courts. We are ready for your final authorization." I looked at my reflection in the dark glass of the hotel window. The woman staring back at me looked calm, incredibly powerful, and entirely in control of her own destiny. Proceed with the total liquidation. Marcus, I instructed, my voice steady and unwavering. Sell the mansion, auction the cars, and liquidate every single asset seized from the family. Do not leave them a single dime. Understood, Marcus replied smoothly. I will file the final paperwork immediately. I ended the call and tossed the phone onto the velvet sofa. The Blackwood Empire was officially dead, and I was the one who had driven the final nail into its coffin. I poured myself another cup of tea, turned away from the window, and prepared to begin the rest of my life. But if you try to take the art, the furniture, or if you steal so much as a light bulb on your way out, I will have you arrested for theft and destruction of property. Beverly's mouth snapped shut. The air left her lungs in a sharp, painful hiss. She slumped back into her chair, finally broken, her eyes darting frantically around the room as if searching for a hidden camera or a legal loophole that simply did not exist. There was no socialite charm left, no haughty arrogance to wield like a weapon. She was just a defeated, terrified woman realizing she was utterly destitute, entirely dependent on the mercy of the daughter-in-law she had relentlessly abused. With the matriarch neutralized, my gaze shifted to the man sitting at the head of the table. The man who had vowed to protect and cherish me, only to view me as a gullible mark and a walking ATM for his fraudulent family. Spencer was a spectacular mess. The smug confidence he had carried into the room had completely liquefied. He was deathly pale, his skin possessing the sickly, translucent sheen of a cornered animal. Sweat poured down his face in heavy rivulets, soaking through the crisp collar of his expensive, custom-tailored shirt and leaving dark, embarrassing patches under his arms. He was trembling so violently that the heavy mahogany table actually vibrated beneath his hands. Seeing that his mother and his supposedly genius brother-in-law had been utterly decimated, Spencer reverted to his only remaining tactic. He tried to play the victim. He tried to play the devoted, misunderstood partner who had simply made a few misguided mistakes out of love. He lunged forward in his chair, leaning across the wide expanse of polished wood, extending a shaking hand toward mine. Tears spilled freely down his cheeks, a pathetic display of manufactured grief, designed to manipulate my emotions one last time. "Riley, baby, please." Spencer wept openly, his voice cracking into a high, desperate whine. "You cannot do this. I am your husband. We took vows. I love you. Everything I did because I was trying to save this family. I was trying to protect our future. Please just listen to me. Give me a chance to explain." I did not feel an ounce of sympathy. I felt only pure, unadulterated disgust. As his sweaty fingers neared mine, I effortlessly pulled my hand back, dodging his touch, as if he were carrying a contagious disease. My expression remained an impenetrable mask of ice. "Do not ever touch me again," I commanded softly. The absolute revulsion in my voice made him flinch physically, snapping his hand back to his chest as if he had been burned. I reached to my right and picked up the fourth and final folder. It was by far the thickest binder of the entire collection, heavy with the weight of his systematic, calculated betrayals. I slammed it down onto the table with a resounding thud and slid it firmly across the smooth surface. It stopped perfectly squarely in front of him. "Open it, Spencer," I ordered. He stared at the black cover as if it were an explosive device waiting to detonate. He slowly reached out with trembling fingers and flipped it open. His red tear-filled eyes immediately locked onto the first document sitting on top of the massive stack of paper. "Divorce papers," I announced, watching the last remaining shred of hope die in his eyes. "Already filed, completely ironclad and citing irreconcilable financial infidelity. But that is the absolute least of your concerns right now. Turn the page." He fumbled with the heavy stock paper, his hands shaking so severely he nearly tore it in half. He stared at the dense, color-coded spreadsheet underneath his jaw, dropping open in shock. "That is evidence of wire fraud, identity theft, and embezzlement," I stated, my voice echoing loudly and clearly in the silent room. "You really thought I was just some naive trust fund girl who never checked her personal accounts, didn't you? You thought I was so blinded by my love for you that I would never notice the financial discrepancies. You created a dummy shell company in Delaware, naming it Blackwood Holdings to sound legitimate. And then you used my social security number, which you stole from my private locked files, to register the LLC. Spencer was hyperventilating now, shaking his head rapidly back and forth, desperate to deny the reality closing in on him. Riley, no, I was just investing for us. I was trying to build a joint portfolio. It was for our future. You were siphoning money from my personal accounts, I snapped, cutting off his pathetic excuse with the sharp edge of the truth. I tracked every single IP address login. I found the forged electronic signatures. You initiated unauthorized transfers late at night while I was sleeping in the bed right next to you. You moved $80,000 as a test run, funneling it directly into Jamal's sinking Ponzi scheme to cover his immediate margin calls. You opened 4 separate high-limit credit cards under my name and maxed them out to fund your luxury lifestyle, leaving me legally responsible for the debt, while you paraded around playing the successful businessman. Vanessa gasped from across the table, momentarily forgetting her own impending ruin. You stole from your own wife to pay Jamal, she asked, her voice dripping with absolute venom. You idiot. You dragged her federal auditors right to our doorstep. Spencer turned on his sister like a rabid dog, his survival instincts overriding any remaining family loyalty. Shut up, Vanessa, he screamed, spittle flying from his lips. Jamal told me to do it. He said he needed immediate liquidity or we would all go down. He threatened to cut me out of the business entirely if I did not secure the capital. They made me do it, Riley. I swear to you I was manipulated by them. Jamal slammed his hands on the table, his face contorted with violent rage. I never told you to commit federal wire fraud, you absolute moron. I asked for a legitimate bridge loan. You are the one who decided to play hacker and steal her identity. Do not try to pin your sloppy, desperate felonies on me. The Blackwood family was actively tearing itself apart right in front of my eyes. The unbreakable loyalty they had weaponized against me for years had completely dissolved into a vicious, ugly scramble for self-preservation. They were turning on each other, screaming accusations, and pointing fingers utterly stripped of their fake wealth, their dignity, and their power. They were finally seeing each other for exactly what they were. I watched the chaos unfold for a few seconds, letting them tear each other to shreds before I raised my hand. The room instantly fell silent. They all looked at me, terrified of what I was going to say or do next. But I was finished talking. I had laid out the undeniable evidence. I had systematically dismantled their entire empire of lies. I had reclaimed my life, my finances, and my dignity. The trap had successfully snapped shut. I turned my head slightly and gave a single definitive nod to Agent Vance. The FBI agent stepped forward from the shadows of the wall, his heavy boots thudding menacingly against the hardwood floor. His face was a mask of professional, uncompromising law enforcement. He reached down to his duty belt and pulled out a pair of heavy steel handcuffs. The metallic clinking sound cut through the dead air of the conference room like a gunshot. Spencer froze, his eyes widening in absolute paralyzing terror as the federal agent stopped directly behind his chair. Spencer Blackwood. Agent Vance said, his voice booming with unquestionable authority. You are under arrest for federal wire fraud and conspiracy to commit bank fraud. Stand up and place your hands behind your back. The rest of my life began with a morning of absolute, undisturbed tranquility. I woke up in the Peninsula suite to the soft, rhythmic hum of the city far below. I ordered a lavish room service breakfast, wrapped myself in a heavy monogrammed robe, and sat by the floor-to-ceiling window, reviewing the final asset liquidation schedules Marcus had sent over. Things were proceeding with flawless clinical efficiency. The bank had taken possession of the suburban mansion. The federal authorities were unspooling Jamal's intricate web of shell companies, dragging Spencer down with every new discovery. It was a perfect morning. That is until my phone buzzed with an incoming text from a former acquaintance at the country club. It was a screenshot followed by a message asking if I had seen what was happening online. Beverly, backed into the filthy, roach-infested corner of her cinder-block motel room, had found the absolute last weapon available to a fallen, desperate socialite. Stripped of her money, her mansion, and her physical access to the elite circles of Chicago's high society, she had taken to Facebook and local community groups. Without her country club luncheons to spread her venom in person, she was weaponizing her keyboard. I zoomed in on the screenshot. Beverly had posted a sprawling, manic, unhinged manifesto. She was practically screaming through the screen, typing in heavy capital letters and excessive punctuation. She called me a manipulative, calculating gold digger who had orchestrated an elaborate, illegal frame-up. She spun a wild, delusional fantasy where I was the secret mastermind behind Jamal's real estate fraud. According to Beverly, I had seduced her innocent son, infiltrated their trusting, God-fearing family, and fabricated federal evidence to steal their generational wealth. Over the next 2 hours, the posts multiplied exponentially. She uploaded photos of me from our wedding, circling my face in digital red ink, like a conspiracy theorist. She tagged local news stations, the Chicago Police Department, and the FBI, claiming that the federal agents had been bought off by my mysterious illicit tech connections. She wrote that Jamal and Spencer were martyrs, innocent businessmen who had fallen victim to a sociopathic woman determined to destroy successful men. Vanessa quickly chimed in the comments, vigorously corroborating the blatant lies. She wept digitally, posting long, rambling paragraphs about being thrown onto the frozen streets with nothing but the clothes on her back, completely omitting the fact that those clothes were stolen investor funds. The narrative was pathetic, disjointed, and entirely fabricated, but in the bored, gossip-hungry circles of suburban Chicago, it was catching fire. Phones were buzzing. Country club housewives were sharing the posts, feasting on the dramatic downfall of the Blackwood family. I sat back on the plush velvet sofa, taking a slow sip of my coffee. I did not feel an ounce of anger. I felt only a mild, clinical annoyance, the kind you experience when a mosquito buzzes near your ear. Beverly wanted a reaction. She wanted me to descend into the mud with her, to engage in a messy public online war of words, where she could play the victim for an audience. I was not going to give her that satisfaction. I do not engage in digital screaming matches with desperate women. I simply picked up my phone and called my lawyer. Marcus answered on the second ring, the sound of keyboard clicking in the background. "Marcus," I said, keeping my voice perfectly even and entirely devoid of emotion. "It appears Beverly has decided to test the outer limits of Illinois defamation law." "I have the screenshots right in front of me," Riley Marcus replied, letting out a dry, humorless chuckle. "It is a textbook case of libel. She is publicly accusing you of federal crimes and orchestrating a conspiracy. We can file an injunction immediately. Shall we crush it? Draft a cease and desist letter," I instructed, standing up and walking toward the window. "Make it so devastating, so legally terrifying and airtight that it permanently silences her. But do not just threaten a standard defamation suit, Marcus. I want to hit her where it actually matters." I paused, looking out over the glittering skyscrapers. Beverly still receives a meager survivor's pension from her late husband's old manufacturing firm. It brings in roughly $2,000 a month. With Jamal's accounts frozen and Spencer in federal custody, that pension is quite literally the only legal cash flow keeping her and Vanessa from starving in that motel. I continued, my tone dropping to a harsh, icy register. "Draft the letter to explicitly state that if she does not permanently delete every single post, every comment, and every social media account within 1 hour of receipt, we will file a massive civil suit for defamation. And specify in bold print that we will actively target, seize, and garnish that exact pension to cover the legal damages. Tell her I will legally reduce her monthly income to absolute zero. Tell her I will ensure she does not have the funds to buy a single loaf of bread." "Consider it done," Marcus said, the professional admiration evident in his voice. "I will have it out the door in 30 minutes. Do not email it," I added sharply. "Send it via bonded legal courier. I want it handed directly to her at that motel." An hour later, I sat at the marble table in my suite, my laptop open, monitoring the community Facebook pages. I watched Beverly's latest post, a frantic plea for a pro bono lawyer to help her sue the federal government, racking up confused and mocking comments. I waited patiently, completely unbothered. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Marcus. The courier had arrived at the Starlight Motel. He had marched past the flickering, broken neon sign, walked down the stained exterior concrete hallway, and pounded heavily on the door of room 114. According to the courier's report, Vanessa had opened the door looking completely unwashed and frantic. Beverly had been sitting on the edge of a sagging mattress, feverishly typing on her phone. The courier, dressed in a sharp, intimidating suit, had handed over the thick, terrifyingly official envelope, loudly announcing that they had been legally served right in front of a passing housekeeping cart. I watched my laptop screen. The digital clock in the corner of my display ticked forward. I knew the exact moment Beverly ripped open the envelope. I knew the exact moment her eyes scanned the heavy legal jargon, skipping past the standard corporate threats and landing squarely on the paragraph detailing the immediate aggressive seizure of her only remaining pension. I knew the exact moment the true, absolute horror of her situation finally breached her delusion. She realized that I was not bluffing. She realized that I held the power to push her from a cheap motel straight onto the unforgiving concrete of the street. Within exactly 10 minutes of the courier's delivery confirmation, the screen refreshed automatically. The long, unhinged rant calling me a gold digger vanished. I hit the refresh key again. The post calling her boys innocent martyrs disappeared into the digital ether. Another refresh. The circled wedding photos, the frantic paranoid comments, the tagged news stations, all of it was gone. I watched in real time, sipping my coffee, as the entire digital footprint of Beverly Blackwood was systematically and frantically erased. She was purging the posts with terrified speed, desperately trying to undo the damage before the 1-hour deadline expired. And then came the final beautiful blow. I searched for her profile name in the search bar. A gray blank screen appeared with a simple automated message indicating the user could not be found. I searched for Vanessa's profile next. The exact same blank screen greeted me. Beverly's social media accounts went dark permanently. Vanessa's accounts followed suit seconds later. They had entirely scrubbed themselves from the internet, terrified of my retaliation. The absolute silence of their defeat was deafening. The transition from the suffocating grasp of the Blackwood family to total exhilarating freedom was almost seamless. I spent the next morning in my hotel suite finalizing the sale of the assets Marcus had secured. Everything moved with clinical precision. But the Blackwood women were never known for their quiet dignity. They were cornered animals, and cornered animals always lash out. It started just before noon. My phone buzzed against the smooth marble of the kitchen island. It was a text from a former country club acquaintance, a woman who had always smiled warmly to my face while eagerly participating in Beverly's vicious gossip behind my back. The text contained a link and a faux sympathetic message asking if I was okay. I clicked the link, navigating to a private Chicago high society Facebook group. Beverly had completely lost her grip on reality. Trapped in that squalid, neon-lit motel room, stripped of her wealth, her mansion, and her social standing, she had resorted to the only weapon she had left: her smartphone keyboard. She had posted a massive, unhinged manifesto spanning several rambling paragraphs. She typed in heavy, frantic capital letters, entirely abandoning her carefully cultivated persona of refined elegance. She explicitly accused me of being a calculating gold digger who had orchestrated an elaborate illegal frame-up. According to her wild, delusional narrative, her son and son-in-law were innocent martyrs. She claimed I had fabricated federal evidence, manipulated the FBI, and stolen their generational wealth to fund my own selfish ambitions. She spun a fantastical story where I was the true mastermind behind Jamal's real estate fraud, using my supposedly illicit tech connections to hack their accounts and plant evidence. The comments section was a chaotic mix of shock, morbid curiosity, and thinly veiled mockery. But Beverly did not stop at one group. She cross-posted her manifesto to neighborhood watch forums, local real estate pages, and even the public comment sections of local Chicago news stations. She uploaded photos of me from my wedding, circling my face in digital red ink, calling me a sociopath and a criminal. Vanessa quickly chimed in, leaving desperately supportive comments under every post. She wept digitally, posting long paragraphs about being thrown onto the frozen streets with nothing but the clothes on her back. She conveniently omitted the fact that those clothes were purchased with stolen investor funds. The narrative was pathetic, disjointed, and entirely fabricated, but in the bored, gossip-hungry circles of suburban Chicago, it was catching fire. Any other woman might have felt panicked, violated, or compelled to defend herself against such a public smear campaign. I felt nothing but a profound, icy calm. I took a slow sip of my chamomile tea. I do not engage in digital screaming matches with desperate, ruined women. They wanted me to descend into the mud with them. They wanted me to argue, to give them an audience, and to validate their manufactured victim complex. I refused to play their game. I picked up my phone and called Marcus. He answered immediately, the sound of typing echoing in the background. "I have seen them, Riley," he said, his tone thoroughly professional, but carrying a hint of amusement. "It is a textbook case of libel and defamation. She is publicly accusing you of federal crimes. We can file an injunction and issue a statement immediately." I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window, looking out over the sprawling city. "Do not issue a public statement," I instructed smoothly. "I will not legitimize her delusions with a public response. Instead, draft a cease and desist letter. Make it so devastating, so legally terrifying and airtight that it permanently silences her." "Understood," Marcus replied. "I will outline the grounds for a massive civil suit." "Go further," I commanded, my voice dropping to a harsh, uncompromising register. "I know Beverly receives a meager survivor's pension from her late husband's old manufacturing firm. It is a modest sum, but right now it is the only legal cash flow keeping her and Vanessa from starving in that motel. Draft the letter to explicitly state that if she does not permanently delete every single post, every comment, and every social media account within 1 hour of receipt, we will file the suit. Specify in bold print that we will actively target, seize, and garnish that exact pension to cover the legal damages. Tell her I will legally reduce her monthly income to absolute zero." There was a brief pause on the line before Marcus spoke, his voice filled with professional admiration. "Consider it done. I will have it out the door in 30 minutes. Do you want it emailed?" "No," I replied. "Send it via bonded legal courier. I want it handed directly to her in that motel room. Let her feel the weight of it." An hour later, I sat at my laptop monitoring the community pages. I watched Beverly post another frantic plea for a pro bono lawyer to help her sue the federal government. I waited patiently, completely unbothered. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. The courier had arrived at the rundown motel on the outskirts of the city. He had walked past the flickering neon vacancy sign, down the stained exterior concrete hallway, and pounded heavily on the door of their room. According to the courier's report, Vanessa had opened the door looking unwashed and frantic. Beverly had been sitting on the edge of a sagging mattress, feverishly typing on her phone. The courier, dressed in a sharp, intimidating suit, had handed over the thick official envelope, loudly announcing that they had been legally served. I kept my eyes fixed on my laptop screen. The digital clock in the corner of my display ticked forward. I knew the exact moment Beverly ripped open the envelope. I knew the exact moment her eyes scanned the heavy legal jargon, skipping past the standard corporate threats and landing squarely on the paragraph detailing the immediate aggressive seizure of her only remaining pension. I knew the exact moment the true, absolute horror of her situation finally breached her delusion. She realized that I was not bluffing. She realized that I held the power to push her from a cheap motel straight onto the unforgiving concrete of the street. Within exactly 10 minutes of the courier's delivery confirmation, the screen refreshed automatically. The long, unhinged rant calling me a gold digger vanished. I hit the refresh key again. The post calling her boys innocent martyrs disappeared into the digital ether. Another refresh. The circled wedding photos, the frantic, paranoid comments, the tagged news stations, all of it was gone. I watched in real time as the entire digital footprint of Beverly Blackwood was systematically and frantically erased. She was purging the posts with terrified speed, desperately trying to undo the damage before the 1-hour deadline expired. And then came the final beautiful blow. I searched for her profile name in the search bar. A gray blank screen appeared with a simple automated message indicating the user could not be found. I searched for Vanessa's profile next. The exact same blank screen greeted me. Beverly's social media accounts went dark permanently. Vanessa's accounts followed suit seconds later. They had entirely scrubbed themselves from the internet, terrified of my retaliation. The absolute silence of their defeat was deafening. The absolute silence of their defeat was deafening. It was the sound of a toxic dynasty collapsing under the weight of its own hubris. The following month was a whirlwind of profound transformation and ruthless execution. I did not pause to gloat, nor did I hesitate when the legal and financial mechanisms I had set in place carried out their final duties. With Spencer rotting in a federal holding cell, entirely stripped of his assets and unable to afford a private lawyer, the divorce proceedings moved at lightning speed. I was granted absolutely everything. I formally evicted Beverly with the stroke of a pen, securing the legal rights to the sprawling suburban mansion. Before turning the property over to the market, I walked through that empty house one last time. My footsteps echoed loudly off the bare hardwood floors. I stood in the cavernous formal dining room and remembered the cruel dinners, the snide comments about my clothes, and the relentless mockery of my profession. The house was completely bare now, stripped of its expensive rugs, its imported art, and its suffocating pretension. It was just an empty, meaningless shell. I handed the keys to the real estate agent waiting in the foyer. "Sell it to the highest bidder," I instructed coldly. "I do not care who buys it." Walking out of that front door and into the crisp Chicago air that day had made me feel lighter than I had in years. I even received a pathetic handwritten letter from Spencer mailed from the federal penitentiary. He begged for commissary money, trying to appeal to my sense of shared history and manufacturing a tone of desperate remorse. I did not even read past the first line. I sealed the envelope, marked it with a bright red rejected stamp, and returned it directly to sender. The millions of dollars recovered from the liquidation of Jamal and Spencer's fraudulent web did not sit idle. I made a massive anonymous donation to a local Chicago charity, specifically funding an initiative that provides financial literacy and aggressive legal aid to women escaping toxic, financially abusive marriages. Meanwhile, my career soared. I was promoted to senior partner in the forensic division at my firm. I was respected by my colleagues, genuinely feared by corporate fraudsters, and deeply, profoundly fulfilled by my work. Now, exactly 1 month after that digital purge, I stood in the center of my brand new reality. I had purchased a stunning, ultra-modern penthouse overlooking Lake Michigan. The space was a masterpiece of contemporary architecture. Floor-to-ceiling glass walls offered panoramic views of the water, the deep blue waves stretching out endlessly toward the horizon. The interior featured crisp white walls, matte black steel accents, and wide plank oak floors. It was a stark, intentional departure from the heavy mahogany and velvet aesthetic of the Blackwood estate. I had decorated every single square inch of this penthouse myself. I did not consult an interior designer. I did not compromise on a single piece of furniture. I filled the space with vibrant modern art, sleek minimalist fixtures, and thriving green plants. The true luxury of this penthouse was not the expensive address or the designer finishes. The true luxury was the absolute, unconditional freedom. There was no walking on eggshells here. There was no listening for the heavy, aggressive footsteps of a husband who resented my intelligence. There was no bracing myself for the sneering, unannounced visits of a mother-in-law who viewed me as a peasant. The air in this home belonged entirely to me. It was clean, sharp, and beautifully unburdened by other people's secrets. I poured a glass of crisp, cold, sparkling water and walked toward the expansive glass wall. The city of Chicago sprawled out below me, a vibrant grid of lights and pulsing energy. I stood there, letting the late afternoon sun warm my skin, and looked back at the journey that had brought me to this exact spot. I thought about the timid, anxious 27-year-old girl who had boarded the Blue Line train on that fateful Tuesday morning just months ago. The girl who had desperately wanted to belong. The girl who had twisted herself into knots, making herself smaller and quieter, just trying to earn the love and approval of a family that only saw her as a disposable stepping stone. She had been so naive, so willing to overlook the subtle cruelties and the glaring financial red flags for the sake of keeping the peace. But that girl was gone. She had been completely burned away in the fires of their betrayal. When I first discovered the offshore Cayman account my grandmother had left me, I thought the money was my savior. I thought the sheer financial weight of the trust fund was the only thing standing between me and absolute ruin. But standing here looking down at the empire I had conquered, I realized the truth. The money was merely a tool. It was leverage, nothing more. What truly saved me was my own mind. It was my relentless, obsessive forensic accounting skills that untangled Spencer and Jamal's complex, hidden web of fraud. It was my strategic patience that allowed me to sit at their dinner table smiling and nodding while I secretly compiled the evidence for their destruction. It was my newly forged, unyielding boundaries that gave me the power to reject Spencer's false apologies and completely crush Beverly's smear campaign. I had weaponized my own intellect. I had become the architect of my own justice. The Blackwoods had tried to bury me completely unaware that I was a seed. The apartment was bathed in the warm, golden hues of the setting sun. The silence was perfect, broken only by the soft hum of the climate control system. Then my phone buzzed. It vibrated against the sleek black marble of the kitchen island, a sharp sound cutting through the quiet. I walked over and picked it up. The screen illuminated with a high-priority secure notification from my wealth management portal. I tapped the screen and opened the encrypted application. The message was brief, automated, and incredibly satisfying. The final sale of the Blackwood suburban estate had officially cleared closing. The sprawling, pretentious mansion where Beverly had tormented me, where Spencer had lied to me, and where Vanessa had mocked my profession, was officially off my hands. The massive sum of the sale had been successfully wired. I watched the numbers on my digital account balance tick upward, finalizing the total absolute liquidation of the Blackwood family's past. I locked my phone, set it face down on the marble, and turned back to look at the lake. I drew in a deep breath of the crisp, clean Chicago air, feeling lighter, stronger, and more powerful than I ever had in my entire life. I turned away from the marble island and walked toward the custom-built wine vault that spanned the entire length of the eastern wall. The tinted glass doors slid open with a soft, expensive whisper. I bypassed the standard vintages and reached for a bottle I had purchased specifically for this exact moment. It was a rare, robust Cabernet Sauvignon, the exact kind of intensely complex wine that Spencer would have sneered at before demanding I open a cheaper, inferior bottle just so he could feel like the dominant financial decision-maker of the house. I uncorked it with smooth, practiced ease, the rich, dark aroma of oak and crushed berries filling the immediate space. I poured a generous measure into a wide crystal glass, watching the deep crimson liquid catch the ambient light of the kitchen. With the heavy crystal glass in hand, I walked toward the motorized sliding glass doors that led out to the wraparound terrace. I tapped the wall console, and the heavy panes glided open silently, welcoming the immediate rush of the evening wind. Stepping out onto the balcony, I was instantly enveloped by the electric hum of Chicago at night. The city sprawled out beneath me, an endless glowing grid of gold and white light stretching as far as the eye could see. It was a vast, sprawling landscape of infinite possibilities, entirely mine for the taking. I stepped up to the thick glass railing and rested my free hand against the cool metal. The wind whipped my hair back sharp and incredibly invigorating. Down below, millions of people were going about their lives completely unaware of the absolute destruction and rebirth that had just taken place miles above them. The avalanche I had carefully methodically engineered, the one that had completely decimated the fraudulent Blackwood Empire, had finally settled. The dust had cleared, the debris had been swept away, and I was the only one left standing. I took a slow, deliberate sip of the Cabernet. It tasted like absolute victory. Looking down at the glowing streets, my mind drifted back to the suffocating reality I had just escaped. I thought about the endless, agonizing Sunday dinners at the suburban estate. I remembered sitting at that oppressive mahogany table, forcing a stiff smile while Beverly delivered her thinly veiled insults disguised as maternal advice. I remembered the sheer exhaustion of constantly walking on eggshells, meticulously shrinking myself down to fit into their twisted patriarchal mold. For years, I had deliberately hidden my own brilliance. I had masked my financial acumen, downplayed my forensic accounting skills, and actively suppressed my own career milestones, all to protect Spencer's incredibly fragile male ego. I had played the role of the quiet, supportive wife, allowing him to posture as the brilliant businessman while he secretly funneled my money into his criminal endeavors. I had allowed myself to be cast as the family scapegoat, the outsider who just did not understand how their version of high society operated. Never again. I would never again sit through another fake family gathering chewing on dry roast beef while listening to criminals brag about their stolen wealth. I would never again bite my tongue when a mediocre, arrogant man tried to explain my own area of expertise to me. I would never again allow my sharp mind and professional success to be viewed as a threat rather than an asset. The era of playing small was permanently over. I turned away from the railing and walked back into the warmth of the penthouse. The transition from the harsh wind to the perfectly climate-controlled interior felt like stepping into a sanctuary. I set my wine glass down on the sleek glass coffee table in the center of the living room and walked over to my handbag resting on the entryway console. I reached into the side pocket and pulled out a small rectangular object. It was my old smartphone, the device that had tethered me to the Blackwood family for the past 5 years. I had already transferred all my essential contacts, my firm's security credentials, and my banking applications to a brand new, highly encrypted device. This old phone was nothing but a digital graveyard. It contained the ghosts of a life I had completely eradicated. Embedded in its memory were the frantic weeping voicemails from Vanessa begging for wire transfers to escape the roach-infested motel. It held the furious, unhinged text messages from Beverly accusing me of destroying her perfect sons. It harbored the pathetic, manipulative emails from Spencer sent directly from his federal holding cell, desperately trying to appeal to a sense of love and duty that he had personally murdered. I did not want those voices following me into my new life. I did not want a single digital trace of their desperation polluting my environment. I pressed my thumb against the side of the device, popping open the small access tray. I tipped the phone over, and the tiny metallic SIM card fluttered out, landing squarely in the palm of my hand. It was such a small, insignificant piece of plastic and copper, yet it held the entire weight of my past. It was the final, lingering chain binding me to the toxic swamp of the Blackwood family. I pinched the small card firmly between my thumb and forefinger. I applied a sharp, sudden burst of pressure. The plastic snapped cleanly in half, with a sharp, satisfying crack. The copper circuitry splintered, severing the digital connection permanently. I walked over to the stainless steel trash receptacle tucked discreetly under the kitchen counter. I held my hand over the dark opening and let the two broken halves of the SIM card fall from my fingers. They hit the bottom of the empty bin with a faint, final rattle. It was done. The severance was absolute. There were no loose ends left to tie, no lingering attachments, and no path for them to ever reach me again. They were locked away in federal prisons and cheap suburban motels, drowning in the massive, crushing consequences of their own spectacular greed. Meanwhile, I stood in the exact center of a life I had built with my own two hands, funded by my own intelligence, and protected by my own unyielding boundaries. I walked back to the living room and picked up my wine glass. I returned to the balcony, stepping out into the cool, rushing night air once more. The city below continued to pulse with light and energy, a vibrant, sprawling canvas waiting for me to leave my mark. I raised my glass to the glittering skyline, a silent toast to the woman I had been forced to become and the massive, untouchable empire I was about to build. I took a final lingering sip of the wine, entirely ready to live the absolute rest of my life on nobody's terms but my own.